Welcome to our channel. Hollywood Movie Review. Mean Streets, 1973, Movie Review. Mean Streets is a 1973 American crime drama film directed by Martin Scorsese from a screenplay co-written with Martin. It stars Harvey Keitel and Robert De Niro, along with David Proval, Amy Robinson, Richard Romanus, and Cesare De Nova. Scorsese's third feature film, it depicts a group of troubled young men in New York's Little Italy and centers on many themes the director would later revisit, including the mafia, Italian-American identity, urban life, and Catholic guilt. Produced independently and released by Warner Bros. Pictures on October 2, 1973, Mean Streets received positive reviews from critics and marked Scorsese's arrival as a major figure of the new Hollywood movement. Robert De Niro won the National Society of Film Critics and the New York Film Critics Circle Awards for Best Supporting Actor for his role as Johnny Boy Civello. In 1997, Mean Streets was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Charlie Capa, a young Italian-American in the Little Italy neighborhood of New York City, is hampered by his feeling of responsibility toward his reckless younger friend Johnny Boy Civello, a small-time gambler and degenerate who refuses to work and owes money to many loan sharks. Charlie is also having a secret affair with Johnny's cousin Teresa, who has epilepsy and is ostracized because of her condition, especially by Charlie's uncle Giovanni, a powerful mafioso, and is told to stay away from her. Giovanni also wants Charlie to distance himself from Johnny, saying that honorable men go with honorable men. Charlie is torn between his devout Catholicism and his illicit mafia work for Giovanni. Johnny becomes increasingly self-destructive and disrespectful of his mafia-connected creditors. Failing to receive redemption in the church, Charlie seeks it through sacrificing himself on Johnny's behalf. At Tony's bar, a loan shark and friend named Michael comes looking for Johnny again to pay his debts. He has been doing so for a few days and is becoming increasingly frustrated, thinking that Johnny is taking advantage of him and that he is not going to pay up, with Charlie promising to convince Johnny. To his surprise, Johnny insults him and tells him that he is not going to pay back the money. Michael lunges at Johnny, who pulls a gun. After a tense standoff, Michael walks away and Charlie convinces Johnny that they should leave town for a brief period. Teresa insists on coming with them. Charlie borrows a car and they drive off, leaving the neighborhood without incident. A car that has been following them suddenly pulls up with Michael at the wheel and his henchman, Jimmy Shorts, in the backseat. Jimmy fires several shots at Charlie's car, hitting Johnny in the neck and Charlie in the arm, causing Charlie to crash the car into a fire hydrant. Teresa is injured in the crash. Johnny is seen in an alley staggering toward a white light that is revealed to be a police car, and Charlie gets out of the crashed vehicle and kneels in the water spurting from the hydrant, dazed and bleeding. Paramedics take Teresa and Charlie away while Johnny's fate remains unknown. Apart from his first actual feature, Who's That Knocking at My Door, this was Scorsese's first feature film of his own design. Director John Cassavetes told him after he completed his second film, Boxcar Bertha, a directing project given to him by early independent filmmaker Roger Corman, "You've just spent a year of your life making a piece of shit." This inspired Scorsese to make a film about his own experiences, inspired by his upbringing in New York's Little Italy. Cassavetes told Scorsese he should do something like Who's That Knocking at My Door, which Cassavetes had liked. The screenplay began as a continuation of the characters in Who's That Knocking? Scorsese and Martin worked on and off on the script, whose working title was Season of the Witch, for 7 years. Scorsese changed the title from Season of the Witch to Mean Streets, a reference to Raymond Chandler's essay The Simple Art of Murder, where Chandler writes, "But down these mean streets a man must go who is not himself mean, who is neither tarnished nor afraid." The title was recommended by Jay Cox, then a film critic, who later became a screenwriter. Scorsese sent the script to Corman, who agreed to back the film if all the characters were black. Scorsese was anxious to make the film, so he considered this option, but actress Verna Bloom arranged a meeting with potential financial backer Jonathan Taplin, the road manager for the band. Taplin liked the script and was willing to raise the $300,000 Scorsese wanted if Corman promised, in writing, to distribute the film. The blaxploitation suggestion came to nothing when funding from Warner Bros. Pictures allowed him to make the film with Italian-American characters. Originally, the film's financiers wanted Jon Voight in the role of Charlie, but he turned them down. Robert De Niro requested the part, but Scorsese cast Harvey Keitel, as he'd written the character with Keitel in mind. De Niro and Keitel considered switching roles, but Scorsese vetoed it. Martin Scorsese provides the voiceover narration heard throughout the film despite not appearing as a character in it, a technique he borrowed from Federico Fellini's I Vitelloni. 1953 principal photography lasted 27 days, between April and June 1973. Due to the low budget, the majority of the film's interiors were shot in Los Angeles, with 7 days of location shooting in New York City. The church scenes were filmed at St. Patrick's Old Cathedral in Little Italy, while the Volpe Bar was a restaurant in the Nolita neighborhood of Manhattan. Many scenes were shot without permits, with Scorsese calling favors from his old friends and neighbors, including Francis Ford Coppola. Many of the crew were veterans of Roger Corman Productions and students from New York University to keep costs down. Cinematographer Kent L. Wakeford was a veteran documentary cameraman who had never shot a feature film before. The scenes where Harvey Keitel and Robert De Niro fight with trash cans and talk behind the bar were completely improvised by the actors. Mean Streets was released on VHS and Betamax in 1985. Citation needed. The film debuted as a letterboxed laserdisc on October 7, 1991, in the U.S. It was released on Blu-ray on April 6, 2011, in France, and in America on July 17, 2012. The film received a 4K Ultra HD and Blu-ray release from the Criterion Collection on November 21, 2023. The film also received a 4K Ultra HD and Blu-ray release from Second Sight on January 15, 2024. Mean Streets received immense critical acclaim on its release. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating of 92% based on 78 reviews, with an average rating of 8.7/10. The website's critics' consensus reads, Mean Streets is a powerful tale of urban sin and guilt that marks Scorsese's arrival as an important cinematic voice and features electrifying performances from Harvey Keitel and Robert De Niro. Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 96 out of 100, based on 11 critics, indicating universal acclaim. Pauline Kael of The New Yorker was among the enthusiastic critics, calling it a true original of our period, a triumph of personal filmmaking and dizzyingly sensual. Vincent Canby of The New York Times reflected that no matter how bleak the milieu, no matter how heartbreaking the narrative, some films are so thoroughly, beautifully realized they have a kind of tonic effect that has no relation to the subject matter. Scorsese had used improvisation better than anyone in American movies so far. He concluded by saying, Scorsese's impulse to express all he feels about life in every scene, a cannier, more prudent director wouldn't have started his film with that great De Niro monologue, and thus to wrench his audience upwards into a new state of consciousness with one prolonged and devastating gesture, infinitely hurting and infinitely tender. Mean Streets comes close enough to this feverish ideal to warrant our love and much of our respect. Retrospectively, Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times inducted Mean Streets on his great movies list and wrote, in countless ways, right down to the detail of modern TV crime shows, Mean Streets is one of the source points of modern movies. In 2011, Empire listed the film as number 1 on its 50 Greatest American Independent Films list. Additionally, in 2013 Entertainment Weekly's staff voted the film the 7th greatest of all time. In 2015, it was ranked 93rd on the BBC's list of the 100 greatest American films. The film also appeared on Variety's 100 greatest films of all time list in 2022. In 1997, Mean Streets was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress as culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Scorsese mainly used vintage pop songs as the movie soundtrack, a revolutionary move at the time. The use of the song Be My Baby by the Ronettes at the start of the film is considered one of the most memorable moments of Scorsese's career, and according to critic Owen Gleiberman, arguably the single greatest use of a pop song in Hollywood history. Lucy Sante wrote Mean Streets changed soundtracks forever. As crime films go, this one is actually pretty solid. It is still far from great, but having in mind my usual dislike for the genre, this is as far as I could like a gangster film, I guess. The story itself is solid, and I really enjoyed the theme of religion in it, as well as the relationship between the two men, as well as the romantic relationship. Truly, all of the character interactions here are quite good, and sometimes the film could be quite tender, which I didn't expect at all. The acting is one of its strongest suits. Robert De Niro and Harvey Keitel both gave truly great performances in one of their first roles. The directing from Scorsese is as great as always, and the editing is also pretty solid. But I was still bored by the movie at times, and somehow the structure didn't work for me, as the entire middle act should have been reduced a bit, as the ending should have been more emphasized and the beginning isn't the most memorable. But it is well made and really well scored. It has a terrific score, to be honest, with many great hits from the 60s and 70s, and its soundtrack is one of the highlights. But I've had some problems with the script. Yes, it did have its great emotional and dramatic moments, and that ending is so great in its ambiguity, but it still had its typical crime trappings such as excessive violence and some very annoying dialogue in it. Not one of the characters was even remotely likable to me, and they all talked and acted in a way that I find extremely insufferable. But that is the problem all of these films have, and Scorsese is definitely a master of the crime/gangster genre, as he at least managed to make some meaningful entries in this one. Although flawed, is still quite solid and at times even great. Mean Streets is also very good at capturing a particular type of immature man. And so we get the macho shit, the determination not to lose face, the brawling, and the play fights in the street with dustbin lids. These are guys that will rip off some kids for $20 and then pop along to the cinema on the proceeds, utterly impervious to their pathetic, parasitical bullshit. It's a man's world, or at least a playpen crammed with overgrown adolescents that Scorsese knows well. In particular, there's a marvelous sequence in which Keitel becomes drunk. The way he goes from boisterous hijinks to lovey-dovey to feeling the strain to passing out captures inebriation in a way I've yet to see bettered. The acting is often good, especially the energetic De Niro. The essence of his pork pie hat-wearing Johnny Boy character is brilliantly caught during his first scene when he blows up a mailbox for no reason except the thrill. He's an intensely unlikable loser of the first degree, a work-shy bullshitter and punk bastard begging to be rubbed out. Or as he tells one guy he owes $3 grand. I don't give a shit about you or nobody else. Amen. What works against it? The way Scorsese lights the blue touch paper and nothing much happens. The meandering Mean Streets contains a tiny, somewhat predictable story. It's overlong, too talky, and, despite running for almost 2 hours, ends abruptly. It also contains quite a few odd scenes that appear to have been included to add color rather than push the story forward. Just look at when two gays, including one limp-wrist, lisping stereotype, somehow end up tagging a ride with our racist, homophobic heroes. Or listen to Keitel telling his girl about a dream in which they're just about to make love and he comes blood all over her instead. Ha! Then a Vietnam vet is introduced for no apparent reason, only to freak out a few minutes later over an unspecified incident. And what's the point of Keitel's bar-owning maid showing off a pair of baby lions in cages when they're never seen again? I also wasn't keen on a knockabout bar fight scene, a wobbly sequence played for laughs that didn't ring true. Scorsese attempts to weave religion into the narrative from the opening moment in which we hear Keitel's off-screen words, "You don't make up for your sins in church. You do it in the streets." Keitel's a practicing Catholic, but the depiction of his faith doesn't amplify or subvert anything going on. He believes in hellfire, often touching naked flames to feel the pain, but it's all a bit half-arsed. I also didn't understand why his miscast girlfriend is shunned because she has epilepsy. I know Catholics believe a heap of daft shit, but surely by the early 70s they'd accepted epilepsy as a neurological disorder that has nothing to do with demonic possession? Perhaps the only way religion adds to the narrative is Keitel's Jesus-like determination to save Johnny Boy. "Who's gonna help him, if I don't?" he asks his girl. Nobody tries anymore. But given that it's obvious Johnny is a lost cause and the biggest jerk-off around, Keitel's altruistic actions just seem naive, if not absurd. Mean Streets has definite strengths. It announced Scorsese as a world-class director, as well as showcasing Keitel and De Niro's talents. Perhaps, though, it's better to view it as a non-judgmental, slice-of-life drama than an action crime flick. If you keep your expectations of thrills and spills low, then maybe it works better, but for me it sets things up and instead of delivering just keeps going in little circles. It would take another 3 years until Scorsese delivered his first masterpiece in the form of Taxi Driver. Martin Scorsese's Mean Streets is not primarily about punk gangsters at all, but about living in a state of sin. For Catholics raised before Vatican II, it has a resonance that it may lack for other audiences. The film recalls days when there was a greater emphasis on sin and rigid ground rules, inspiring dread of eternal suffering if a sinner died without absolution. The keywords in the movie are the first ones, spoken over a black screen: you don't make up for your sins in church. You do it in the streets. You do it at home. All the rest is BS and you know it. The voice belongs to Scorsese. We see Charlie, Harvey Keitel, starting up in bed, awakened by a dream, and peering at his face in a bedroom mirror. The voice was Scorsese's, but it possibly represents words said to him by a priest. Later, Charlie talks in a voiceover about how a priest gave him the usual 10 Hail Marys and 10 Our Fathers, but he preferred a more personal penance. In the most famous shot in the film, he holds his hand in the flame of a votive candle before the altar, testing himself against the fires of hell. The clearest fact about Charlie, Pauline Kael wrote in her influential review launching the 1973 film, is that whatever he does in his life, he's a sinner. The film uses lighting to suggest his slanted moral view. The real world is shot in ordinary colors, but then Charlie descends into the bar run by his friend Tony, and it is always bathed in red, the color of sex, blood, and guilt. He enters the bar in a series of shots at varying levels of slow motion, a Scorsese trademark. He walks past his friends, exchanging ritual greetings, and eventually he gets up on the stage with the black stripper and dances with her for a few bars of rock and roll. He fantasizes about the stripper, Jeannie Bell, and later in the movie even makes a date with her, but fears being seen by his friends with a black woman, and stands her up. He also dreams of his cousin Teresa, Amy Robinson, who is Johnny's sister. They have sex, but when she says she loves him, he says, "Don't say that." For him, both women, any woman he feels lust for, represent a possible occasion of sin, which invests them with such mystery and power that sex pales by comparison. Immediately after dancing with the stripper, he goes to the bar, lights a match and holds his finger above it, instant penance. Charlie walks through the movie seeking forgiveness from his uncle Giovanni, Cesare De Nova, who is the local mafia boss, and from Teresa, his best friend Johnny Boy, Robert De Niro, the local loan shark Michael, Richard Romulus, and even from God. He wants redemption. Scorsese, whose screenplay has autobiographical origins, knows why Charlie feels this way. He knows in his bones that the church is right, and he is wrong and weak. Although he is an apprentice gangster involved with men who steal, kill, and sell drugs, Charlie's guilt centers on sex. Impurity is the real sin, the other stuff is business. The film watches Charlie as he uneasily tries to reconcile his various worlds. He works as a collector for Giovanni, hearing the sad story of a restaurant owner who has no money. Charlie is being groomed to run the restaurant, but must obey Giovanni, who forbids him to associate with Johnny Boy. Honorable men go with honorable men, and with Teresa, whose epilepsy is equated in Giovanni's mind with madness. Trouble is brewing because Johnny Boy owes money to Michael, who is growing increasingly unhappy about his inability to collect. De Niro plays Johnny almost as a holy fool, a smiling jokester with no sense of time or money, and a streak of self-destruction. The first time we see him in the film, he blows up a corner mailbox. Why? No reason. De Niro and Keitel have a scene in the bar's back room that displays the rapport these two actors would carry through many movies. Charlie is earnest, frightened, telling Johnny he has to pay the money. Johnny launches on a rambling, improvised cock-and-bull story about a poker game, a police raid, a fight, finally even losing the thread himself. Scorsese first displayed his distinctive style in his first feature, I Call First / Who's That Knocking at My Door, which was also set in Little Italy and also starred Keitel. In both films he uses a handheld camera for scenes of quick movement and fights, and scores everything with period rock and roll music, a familiar tactic now, but unheard of in 1967. The style is displayed joyously in Mean Streets as Charlie and friends go to collect from a pool hall owner, who is happy to pay. But then Johnny Boy is called a mook, and although nobody seems quite sure what a mook is, that leads to a wild, disorganized fight. These are not smooth stuntmen, slamming each other in choreographed action, but uncoordinated kids in their 20s who smoke too much, drink too much, and fight as if they don't want to get their shirts torn. The camera pursues them around the room, and Johnny Boy leaps onto a pool table, awkwardly practicing the karate kicks he's learned in 42nd Street grindhouses. On the soundtrack is Please Mr. Postman by the Marvelettes. Scorsese's timing is acute. Cops barge in to break up the fight, are paid off by the pool hall owner, leave, and then another tussle breaks out. Underlying everything is Charlie's desperation. He loves Johnny and Teresa, but is forbidden to see them. He tries to be tough with Teresa, but lacks the heart. His tenderness toward Johnny Boy is shown in body language, hair tousling, backslapping, and in a scene where Johnny is on the roof, shooting out the light in the Empire State Building. Charlie essentially feels bad about everything he does, his self-hatred colors every waking thought. At one point, late in the film, he goes into the bar, orders scotch, and holds his fingers over the glass as the bartender pours, copying the position of the priest's fingers over the chalice. That kind of sacramental detail would also be a motif in Taxi Driver, where overhead shots mirror the priest's eye view of the altar, and the hero also places his hand in a flame. Everything leads, as it must, to the violent conclusion, in which Michael, the loan shark who feels insulted, drives while a gunman, Scorsese, fires in revenge. Who can be surprised that Charlie, after the shooting, is on his knees? Seen after 25 years, Mean Streets is a little creaky at times. This is an early film by a director who is still learning, and who learned so fast that by 1976 he would be ready to make Taxi Driver, one of the greatest films of all time, also with De Niro and Keitel. The movie doesn't have the headlong flow, the unspoken confidence in every choice, that became a Scorsese hallmark. It was made on a tiny budget with actors still finding their way, and most of it wasn't even shot on the mean streets of the title, but in disguised Los Angeles locations. But it has an elemental power, a sense of spiraling doom, that a more polished film might have lacked. And in the way it sees and hears its characters, who are based on the people Scorsese knew and grew up with in Little Italy, it was an astonishingly influential film. If Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather fixed an image of the mafia as a shadow government, Scorsese's Mean Streets inspired the other main line in modern gangster movies, the film of everyday reality. The Godfather was about careers. Mean Streets was about jobs. In it you can find the origins of all those other films about the criminal working class, like King of the Gypsies, Goodfellas, City of Industry, Sleepers, State of Grace, Federal Hill, Gridlocked, and Donnie Brasco. Great films leave their mark not only on their audiences, but on films that follow. In countless ways, right down to the detail of modern TV crime shows, Mean Streets is one of the source points of modern movies. I was 10 years old when Mean Streets came out, and I saw it with my parents. It opened with what looked like home movies, and in the background I saw the familiar landscape of Lower Manhattan, where my father took me when he worked construction. Because there were no special effects or fancy edits, the image of home movies stayed with me throughout the film, and I identified with the people and the neighborhood I was watching. This was the first time I had really seen people I knew on a big screen. I didn't know them specifically, but they reminded me of my family and my family's friends. They talked like we did. They acted like we did. I recognized the restaurants and streets. They dressed in suits and ties on a daily basis, while I was used to seeing adults in jeans and work boots, but other than that, I recognized every one of them. I figured the guy who made the movie must have had a blast making it, because he probably only had to go down a couple flights of stairs to go to work. And what work! He showed the two main characters in the middle of the night, in the middle of the street, play fighting with garbage can lids, making bees sounds like kids do when they pretend punch. It reminded me mostly of my favorite film, when I was 10, and to this day, Dead End. I've stayed familiar with the man behind the movie, seeing the world I knew through his lens over and over. I sat 2 tables over from him once in an Italian restaurant, and it was all I could do not to walk over and start talking to him. We call him Cousin Marty in my house. Mean Streets first flickered past Martin Scorsese through the big screen of his bedroom window when he was a kid, holed up in his apartment because of asthma. The small-time neighborhood crooks like the film's Charlie, Johnny Boy, Tony and Michael exerted as much influence on the director, who almost became a priest, as did the church or the cinema. He would return to these gangster roots many times, in Goodfellas, Casino and The Departed, with greater and greater authority. The Jake LaMotta biopic Raging Bull is set in the mob-connected world of boxing. Jake the Fake took a dive in a bout against Billy Fox on orders from Frank Carbo, the most powerful behind-the-scenes force in boxing at the time, for his boss, Tommy Three-Finger Brown Lucchese. Scorsese made his bones in film behind the lens in the rock world, as a cameraman at the Rolling Stones' free outdoor concert at Altamont that became Gimme Shelter, assistant directing and editing Woodstock and editing Elvis tour footage. Mean Streets moves with the rhythms of rock and roll. We hear doo-wop harmonies, girl group oldies, Italian pop favorites and contemporary Rolling Stones hits blasting from the jukeboxes. Salsa blares from the windows. Italian marches blow on the streets. Motown hits scream from car radios. Mean Streets doesn't play out on the manicured Long Island lawns of The Godfather, where elite dons live like kings and commute for crime. These are the day job enforcers. These are Goodfellas on a $500,000 budget. John Cassavetes urged Scorsese to take a chance on making a personal film after spending a year on the piece of shit Roger Corman-produced Boxcar Bertha. Scorsese wrote the screenplay with Mardik Martin while driving around Little Italy. Interiors may have been shot in Los Angeles, but the film lives and breathes on location, fed on the feast of San Gennaro, the patron saint of Naples. The Roman Catholic faithful gather at Naples Cathedral 3 times a year to witness the martyred bishop's blood liquefy. Mean Streets was intended to be the last part of the unrealized JR trilogy of autobiographical Catholic guild films that he began with Who's That Knocking on My Door, which was also set in Manhattan's Little Italy and which also starred Harvey Keitel. In Mean Streets, Harvey Keitel plays Charlie, who collects protection money for his uncle Giovanni, played by Cesare Danova, who lost Anne Margaret to Elvis in Viva Las Vegas. Charlie is slated to take over a bankrupt restaurant if he can get away from his sick-in-the-head girlfriend, Amy Robinson, who went on to produce Scorsese's After Hours, among other films, and dead-end friends, like Johnny Boy. Charlie feels responsible. His Catholic guilt doesn't square with his day job. St. Francis didn't run numbers for the sins and transgressions of his friend Johnny Boy. He sees his friend's spiraling self-destruction as penance. Everybody's got a crazy friend or uncle. One of my uncles stole a Jersey City cop car and abandoned it on the Brooklyn Bridge. Robert De Niro plays Johnny Boy with a reckless, I don't give a shit attitude that steals the film with the same ease Johnny Boy ducks his own debts. Until Martin Scorsese, pulling an Alfred Hitchcock turn as a goon hired by the loan shark Michael, Richard Romanus, shoots him. Not to death, though. Johnny Boy is condemned to live. To go back to the neighborhood. As a kid, my favorite character was Tony, the wise guy who loved William Blake and cuddled up with a caged wildcat in the basement of his bar, Volpe's Topless. Tony was played by the magnificent David Proval, best known as the quintessential Manson Lamps character Richie Aprile on The Sopranos, but who's been in everything, including the animated cult classic Wizards as the robot hitman Necron 99. Any mook can start trouble on Scorsese's Mean Streets. One bad word can get punches flying. Tony rakes a junkie from the bathroom through the bar and out into the street, dragging his dealer with him. A soldier celebrating his return from Vietnam breaks up his own party. A drinker jumps over a table to lay into a guy without warning. Violence erupts without warning and gets spent just as quickly, so as not to ruin the tough guy's nicer shoes. Johnny Boy antagonizes the bookie Joey, George Memoli, while Charlie is brokering pay for a winning bet for a friend. This results in a bar fight that plays out with only almost reckless abandon until Joey takes a break to pay off a beat cop. Let me give you car fare. How far you going? Jersey. Philadelphia. The brothers Carradine, David and Robert, share a great scene as a hit plays itself out drunkenly at the urinal at Tony's place and spills out into the bar. The neighborhood padrone, Giovanni, is past his time of violence. He counsels Charlie to be patient and honorable, giving the same advice he gave Charlie's father. Reminding them that all Charlie Lucky had to do was be there to help the ball-busting government keep peace on the docks during wartime. Charlie doesn't straighten himself out with the church or the streets. He can't save his friend from himself and he can't make him see reason and pay off Michael. Charlie doesn't get made, but Martin Scorsese, Robert De Niro and Harvey Keitel all got their buttons from this film. Mean Streets is one of cinema's most influential films because it is one of the most personal. It is so much a home movie that it could pair Martin with Catherine Scorsese for a third, but hardly last, time. The director and the actors are at home and unself-conscious. Every scene feels improvised and spontaneous. The landscape of New York City has gone through a lot of changes since 1973, but there are sections of Manhattan's Little Italy that haven't changed. Some of the buildings have new stores or restaurants and the street signs have changed color and design, but parts are still frozen in time, like a home movie. Ultimately, Mean Streets is a story about redemption denied. No matter how long you hold your hands in the flame, you can't burn away the sins you earn on the street because you don't fuck with the ultimate. Martin Scorsese's Mean Streets is a true original of our period, a triumph of personal filmmaking. It has its own hallucinatory look, the characters live in the darkness of bars, with lighting and color just this side of lurid. It has its own unsettling, episodic rhythm and a high-charged emotional range that is dizzyingly sensual. At the beginning, there's a long, fluid sequence as the central character, Charlie, comes into a bar and greets his friends. There's the laying on of hands, and we know that he is doing what he always does. And when the camera glides along with him as he's drawn toward the topless dancers on the barroom stage, we share his trance. At the end of the scene, when he's up on the stage, entering into the dance, he's not some guy who's taken leave of his senses but a man going through his nightly ritual. Movies generally work you up to expect the sensual intensities, but here you may be pulled into high without warning. Violence erupts crazily, too, the way it does in life, so unexpectedly fast that you can't believe it, and over before you've been able to take it in. The whole movie has this effect, it psychs you up to accept everything it shows you. And since the story deepens as it goes along, by the end you're likely to be open-mouthed, trying to rethink what you've seen. Though the street language and the operatic style may be too much for those with conventional tastes, if this picture isn't a runaway success, the reason could be that it's so original that some people will be dumbfounded, too struck to respond. It's about American life here and now, and it doesn't look like an American movie, or feel like one. If it were subtitled, we could hail a new European or South American talent, a new Buñuel steeped in Verdi, perhaps, and go home easier at heart. Because what Scorsese, who is 30, has done with the experience of growing up in New York's Little Italy has a thicker textured rot and violence than we have ever had in an American movie, and a riper sense of evil, the zinger in the movie, and it's this, I think, that begins to come together in one's head when the picture is over, is the way it gets at the psychological connections between Italian Catholicism and crime, between sin and crime. Some editorial writers like to pretend this is all a matter of prejudice. They try to tell us that there is no basis for the popular ethnic stereotypes, as if crime among Italians didn't have a different tone from crime among Irish or Jews or blacks. Editorial writers think they're serving the interests of democracy when they ask us to deny the evidence of our senses. But all crime is not alike, and different ethnic groups have different styles of lawlessness. These mafiosi loafers hang around differently from loafing blacks. In some ways, the small-time hoods of mean streets, good Catholics who live at home with their parents, have more in common with the provincial wolf pack of Fellini's I Vitelloni, cadging, indulged sons of middle-class families than with the other ethnic groups in New York City. And these hoods live in such an insulated world that anyone outside it, the stray Jew or black they encounter, is as foreign and funny to them as a little man from Mars. Many people interpreted the success of The Godfather to mean that the film glorified the gangsters' lives. During the Second World War, a documentary showing the noise and congestion of New York City was cheered by nostalgic American soldiers overseas. If audiences were indeed attracted to the life of the Corleone family, and I think some probably were, the reaction may be just as aberrant to the intentions of The Godfather, the best gangster film ever made in this country. It's likely that Italian, or Sicilian, Catholicism has a special, somewhat romantic appeal to Americans at this time. Italians appear to others to accept the fact that they're doomed, they learn to be comfortable with it, it's what gives them that warm, almost tactile glow. Their voluptuous, vacant-eyed smiles tell us that they want to get the best out of this life, they know they're going to burn in eternity, so why should they think about things that are depressing? It's as if they were totally carnal, everything is for their pleasure. Maybe it is this relaxed attitude that gave the mafiosi of The Godfather their charm for the American audience. Was the audience envying them their close family ties and the vitality of their lawlessness? Was it envying their having got used to a sense of sin? It's almost as if the non-Catholic part of America wanted to say that men culpa is nostra culpa. Before Mean Streets is over, that glow gets very hot and any glamour is sweated off. The clearest fact about Charlie, Harvey Keitel, junior member of a mafia family, and, in a non-literal sense, the autobiographical central figure, is that whatever he does in his life, lies a sinner. Behind the titles you see him smiling his edgy, jocular smile and shaking hands with a priest, as if sealing a pact, while the words appear, directed by Martin Scorsese. Charlie, you can see in his tense ferret's face, feels he was born to be punished. Like his friends, round-faced, jovial Tony the barkeep, David Proval, and pompous Michael, Richard Romanus, a chiseling dude, he basks in the life. Running numbers, gambling, two-bit swindles, they grew up in this squalor and it's all they've ever known or wanted. To them, this is living it up. But Charlie isn't a relaxed sinner, he torments himself, like a fanatic seminarian. He's so frightened of burning he's burning already. Afraid of everything, he's everybody's friend, always trying to keep the peace. He's a dutiful toady to his uncle Giovanni, Cesare Denova, the big man in the mafia, and he fails those he really cares about, his girl, Teresa, Amy Robinson, and his friend Johnny Boy, Robert De Niro, a compulsive gambler, more than compulsive, irrational, a gambler with no sense of money. Charlie is too vain and sycophantic not to give in to social pressure. Teresa isn't rated high enough by his uncle, and his uncle, his king, the source of the restaurant he hopes to get, has told him not to be involved with Johnny Boy. Johnny Boy was named after Giovanni, but the family protects you only if you truckle to the elder statesman and behave yourself, if you're a good time server. Johnny Boy isn't, he flouts all the rules, he just won't behave. He's fearless, gleefully self-destructive, cracked, moonstruck but not really crazy. His madness isn't explained, fortunately, since explaining madness is the most limiting and generally least convincing thing a movie can do. When you're growing up, if you know someone crazy daring and half-admirable, and maybe most of us do, you don't wonder how the beautiful nut got that way, he seems to spring up full-blown and whirling, and you watch the fireworks and feel crummily cautious in your sanity. That's how it is here. Charlie digs Johnny Boy's recklessness. De Niro's Johnny Boy is the only one of the group of grifters and scummy racketeers who is his own man, he is the true hero, while Charlie, through whose mind we see the action, is the director's worst vision of himself. The story emerges from the incidents without dominating them, it's more like a thread running through. The audience isn't propelled by suspense devices, nor is the cataclysmic finish really an end, it's only a stop. Johnny Boy needs help. He owes Michael, the dude, a lot of money, and it hurts Michael's self-esteem that he can't collect, nagging and spiteful, he threatens violence. But Charlie doesn't save Johnny Boy by going to his big-shot uncle for help, because he just can't risk taking a problem to his uncle. A good mafia boy is not only subservient, unless something important is happening to him, he maintains his visibility as near to invisibility as possible. Uncle Giovanni, a dignified, dull man, doesn't really see Charlie, doesn't register his existence, and that's what keeps Charlie in his good graces. But if Charlie asks for help for a crazy friend in trouble, he loses his low visibility. So Charlie talks a lot to Johnny Boy about friendship and does nothing. He's Judas the betrayer because of his careful angling to move up the next rung of the ladder. How can a man show his soul to be pettier than that? Charlie, the surrogate for the director, is nobody's friend, and, as the movie itself proves, least of all his own. Charlie knows from the beginning that he pays for everything. Scorsese isn't asking for expiation of Charlie's sins in the movie, sins aren't expiated in this movie. The director has cast himself in the bit part of Michael's helper. When Johnny Boy makes Michael look so bad that Michael decides to get satisfaction, it is Scorsese who, as the gunman, pulls the trigger. It's 20 years since Fellini's I Vitelloni planted the autobiographical hero on the screen. Fellini did it in a fairly conventional way. His Moraldo, Franco Interlenghi, was the sensitive, handsome observer who looked at the limitations of small-town life and, at the end, said goodbye to all that. In La Dolce Vita, the Fellini figure was the seduced, disillusioned journalist, Marcello Mastroianni, to whom everything happened, and in 8.5 Mastroianni, again standing in for Fellini, was the movie director at the center of a multi-ring circus, the man sought after by everyone. In Roma, Fellini threw in new versions of several of his earlier representatives, and himself to boot. No other movie director, except among the underground filmmakers, has been so explicitly autobiographical. But in I Vitelloni we never caught a glimpse of the actual Fellini who emerged later, we never saw the fantasist as a young man, or the energy and will that drove him on. Movie directors have not yet learned the novelist's trick of throwing themselves into the third person, into the action, as Norman Mailer does even in his reporting. Directors tend to make their own representatives passive, reflective figures, with things happening to them and around them, like Richard Dreyfuss, in George Lucas's nice, though overrated, Little Picture American Graffiti. Scorsese does something far more complex, because Charlie's wormy, guilt-ridden consciousness is made abhorrent to us at the same time that we're seeing life through it. Charlie is so agitated because he is aware of his smallness. Scorsese's method is more like that of the Montreal filmmaker Claude Jetra, who, playing himself in a tout prendre, masochistically made himself weak, like those chinless self-portraits with traumatic stares which painters put at the edges of their canvases. Jetra left out the mind and energies that made him a movie director, and apparently put on the screen everything in himself he loathed, and this is what Scorsese does, but Scorsese also puts in the tensions of a man in conflict, and a harlequin externalization of those tensions. He's got that dervish Johnny Boy dancing around Charlie's fears, needling Charlie and exposing him to danger despite all his conciliatory nice guyism. Johnny Boy's careless, contemptuous explosions seem a direct response to Charlie's trying to keep the lid on everything. It's as if Charlie's ID were throwing bombs and laughing at him. When Johnny Boy has finally loused everything up, he can say to Charlie, "You got what you wanted." While an actor like Jeff Bridges in The Last American Hero hits the true note, De Niro here hits the far-out, flamboyant one and makes his own truth. He's a bravura actor, and those who have registered him only as the grinning, tobacco-chewing dolt of that hunk of inept whimsy hang the drum slowly will be unprepared for his volatile performance. De Niro does something like what Dustin Hoffman was doing in Midnight Cowboy, but wilder. This kid doesn't just act, he takes off into the vapors. De Niro is so intensely appealing that it might be easy to overlook Harvey Keitel's work as Charlie. But Keitel makes De Niro's triumph possible. Johnny Boy can bounce off Charlie's anxious, furious admiration. Keitel, cramped in his stiff clothes, these mafiosi dress respectable, in the long, dark overcoats of businessmen of an earlier era, looks like a more compact Richard Conte or Dane Clark, and speaks in the rhythms of a lighter voice John Garfield, Charlie's idol. It's his control that holds the story together. The whole world of the movie, Catholicism as it's actually practiced among these people, what it means on the street, is in Charlie's mingy-minded face. The picture is stylized without seeming in any way artificial. It is the only movie I've ever seen that achieves the effects of expressionism without the use of distortion. Mean Streets never loses touch with the ordinary look of things or with common experience. Rather, it puts us in closer touch with the ordinary, the common, by turning a different light on them. The ethnic material is comparable to James T. Farrell's Studs Lonergan trilogy and to what minor novelists like Lewis Golding did in the street and tenement novels of the 30s, but when this material is written on the screen the result is infinitely more powerful. In a film review in 1935, Graham Greene, a Catholic, said that the camera can note with more exactitude and vividness than the prose of most living playwrights the atmosphere of mean streets and cheap lodgings. And though Mean Streets has links to all those Richard Conte Italian family movies, like House of Strangers, and to the urban feudal life of The Godfather, the incidents and details are far more personal. Scorsese, who did the writing with Mardik Martin, knows the scene and knows how it all fits together. It's his, and he has the ability to put his feelings about it on the screen. All this is what the Boston Irish world of the Friends of Eddie Coyle lacked. The picture was shallow and tedious, because although we could see how the gangsters victimized each other, the police and the gangsters had no roots, and intertwined roots were what it was meant to be about. It was a milieu picture without milieu. In Mean Streets, every character, every sound is rooted in those streets. The back and forth talk of Charlie and Johnny Boy isn't little people empty funny, as it was in Marty. It's a tangle of jeering and joshing, of mutual goading and nerves getting frayed. These boys understand each other too well. Charlie's love for Johnny Boy is his hate for himself, and Johnny Boy knows Charlie's flaw. No other American gangster milieu film has had this element of personal obsession. There has never before been a gangster film in which you felt that the director himself was saying, "This is my story." Not that we come away thinking that Martin Scorsese is or ever was a gangster, but we're so affected because we know in our bones that he has walked these streets and has felt what his characters feel. He knows how natural crime is to them. There is something of the Carol Reed film The Third Man in the way the atmosphere imposes itself, and, like Reed, Scorsese was best known as an editor on Woodstock, Medicine Ball Caravan, Elvis on Tour CBS documentaries, etc., before he became a director. Who's that knocking at my door? Boxcar Bertha. Graham Greene, the screenwriter of The Third Man, wrote a prescription for movies that fits this one almost perfectly. The cinema, Greene said, has always developed by means of a certain low cunning. We are driven back to the blood, the thriller. We have to dive below the polite level, to something nearer to the common life. And when we have attained to a more popular drama, even if it is in the simplest terms of blood on a garage floor, there lay Duncan laced in his golden blood, the scream of cars in flight, all the old excitements at their simplest and most surefire, then we can begin, secretly, with low cunning, to develop our poetic drama. And, again, if you excite your audience first, you can put over what you will of horror, suffering, truth. However, Scorsese's atmosphere is without the Baroque glamour of evil that makes The Third Man so ambiguous in its appeal. There's nothing hokey here, it is a low, malign world Scorsese sees. But it's seen to the beat of an exuberant, satiric score. Scorsese has an operatic visual style, the swarthy, imaginative cinematography is by Kent Wakeford, and, with Jonathan T. Taplin, the 26-year-old rock record impresario, as producer, he has used a mixture of records to more duplicit effect than anyone since Kenneth Anger in Scorpio Rising. It's similar to Bertolucci's use of a motley score in Before the Revolution and The Conformist and to the score in parts of The Godfather, but here the music is a more active participant. The score is the background music of the characters' lives, and not only the background, because it enters in. It's as if these characters were just naturally part of an opera with pop themes. The music is the electricity in the air of this movie, the music is like an engine that the characters move to. Johnny Boy, the most susceptible, half dances through the movie, and when he's trying to escape from Michael he does a jerky frog before hopping into the getaway car. He enjoys being out of control, he revels in it, and we can feel the music turning him on. But Mean Streets doesn't use music, as Easy Rider sometimes did, to do the movie's work for it. In American Graffiti, the old rock nostalgia catches the audience up before the movie even gets going. The music here isn't our music, meant to put us in the mood of the movie, but the characters' music. And bits of old movies become part of the opera, too, because what the characters know of passion and death, and even of big-time gangsterism, comes from the movies. In Scorsese's vision, music and the movies work within us and set the terms in which we perceive ourselves. Music and the movies and the church. A witch's brew. I've seen Mean Streets before, though it took me about 4 attempts to get through the whole thing. It's one of those pivotal films that influenced everybody and which everyone raves about, but I just couldn't get it. It's powerfully shot, in a very independent way, and the acting is superb, but somehow it just runs and runs and runs and everything that happens just leaves me dry. I couldn't ever find the point, even though the point is narrated to us at the beginning of the film by Martin Scorsese himself. You don't make up for your sins in church. You do it in the streets. You do it at home. The rest is bullshit and you know it. What I seem to have been missing all along is 2 key things. The first is that director and co-writer Martin Scorsese was torn as a young man about whether to become a priest or a gangster, but failed as both, succeeding instead as a filmmaker. Therefore the lead character in Mean Streets is really Scorsese himself, even though he's called Charlie and he's played by Harvey Keitel. He's a made man, a minor player in New York organized crime and serious about his work, but he also has a need to be forgiven for what he does and doesn't understand how the church can keep forgiving him for the same acts that he continues to commit week after week. The other has to do with the scene that happens quickly after Charlie leaves the church at the beginning of the film, wondering about how he can give a penance that means something. He goes to his friend Tony's bar, which is bathed in red light like a vision of hell. As he sits there with his fellow mobsters, in walks Johnny Boy with a girl without a name on each shoulder. He's a wild and seemingly uncontrollable young colleague, perhaps even a protege, who owes everyone money and spends his time avoiding paying them. And the point I was missing is that Johnny Boy is Charlie's penance. With this knowledge, the whole film makes a lot more sense. Instead of a mostly plotless collection of apparently random scenes, it becomes a slowly but surely fleshed out exposition of a theme. While it's hardly a story you could call enjoyable, this knowledge makes it a much easier film to watch and to appreciate. The fact that New York Italians can't do a single thing without arguing about it still drives me insane, but I don't think this concept is anything I'm ever going to get past in a Scorsese film. At least people like Robert De Niro and Harvey Keitel do it so much better than, say, Nicolas Cage in Moonstruck. This film is superbly acted in a very realistic way that utterly fits the guerrilla-style filmmaking. Robert De Niro is suitably wild as Johnny Boy, looking like an English hooligan with an annoying grin and apparent dedication to the road to self-destruction. He spends half his screen time making excuses and the rest doing dumb things like trying to shoot out the lights on the Empire State Building. Harvey Keitel is even better as Charlie, suitably torn between his work as a minor member of the mob, collecting debts and running numbers. He looks forward to taking over a restaurant as the owner can't pay what he owes. This pair have a number of dynamic scenes together, and I wonder how much of them was improvised. The film really belongs to Martin Scorsese though, as improvisation notwithstanding, it's very much an extrapolation of himself. Even the soundtrack mostly comes from his own record collection. I think this knowledge will flavor every subsequent Scorsese film I see, just as I already know that New York is a character in each of them. It always helps to know something about a director while watching his work, but it would seem to be a little more important in this case. Without it, you may end up asleep during it, just like I used to do so often. On page 73 of the first edition hardback, Ebert likens losing his Catholic faith to the internal struggle of Harvey Keitel's character in the film. He writes, "When I saw Harvey Keitel placing his hand in the flame in Mean Streets, I identified with him. The difference between us was that long before I reached the age of Charlie in the film, I had lost my faith. It didn't make sense to me any longer. There was no crisis of conscience. It simply all fell away." He also mentions on page 276 that Scorsese, who he affectionately refers to as Marty, sent him early screenplays that would eventually blossom into Mean Streets, and that critic Pauline Kael was another major supporter of the film. What Ebert had to say in his reviews. Martin Scorsese's Mean Streets isn't so much a gangster movie as a perceptive, sympathetic, finally tragic story about how it is to grow up in a gangster environment. Its characters, like Scorsese himself, have grown up in New York's Little Italy, and they understand everything about that small slice of human society except how to survive in it. From his 1973 review for the Chicago Sun-Times, Martin Scorsese's Mean Streets is not primarily about punk gangsters at all, but about living in a state of sin. For Catholics raised before Vatican II, it has a resonance that it may lack for other audiences. The film recalls days when there was a greater emphasis on sin and rigid ground rules, inspiring dread of eternal suffering if a sinner died without absolution. From his 2003 review for his great movie series, I'm going to get this disclosure out of the way early: Goodfellas is probably my favorite movie. At the very least, it shares the top spot with Boogie Nights, which is a film that was heavily influenced by Goodfellas. I know this is a sort of bland, generic selection for personal favorite film that doesn't shed much light on my cinematic tastes. Would it help if I also made it clear that John Waters is my favorite director? But that doesn't make it any less true. Goodfellas is a fun, gorgeous, devastating work of pop cinema that pulls off my favorite formula in the art of filmmaking, combining highbrow finery with lowbrow trash. It constructs one of the most perfectly balanced and lush cinematic journeys I'm likely to ever see before I die. I cannot say enough good things about it, so I should probably just cut myself off now before the gushing becomes unbearable. It took a long time for Scorsese, or Uncle Marty if you will, to perfect his Italian-American crime life aesthetic for what would eventually be, by my measurement, his magnum opus. Indeed, a lot of his highly lauded work came before Goodfellas' release: Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, The Last Temptation of Christ. Even before these hallmarks in the director's career, however, he had given Goodfellas something of a dry run in his early work, Mean Streets. Scorsese's third feature film is impossible to discuss without mentioning the shadow of Goodfellas that looms over it. Praising the film's innovation or artistic specificity now would feel like exalting the brilliance of the match after the invention of the blowtorch or the flamethrower or the nuclear bomb. Mean Streets is a germ of an idea that Uncle Marty would later hatch and perfect. As someone who wasn't around to catch the original version of Goodfellas in isolation, it's difficult for me to judge it too fairly or afford it much patience. For so much of Mean Streets' runtime, I find myself wishing I were watching its superior incarnation instead. As much as I'm downplaying Mean Streets here as Goodfellas' older loser brother who still sleeps on mom's couch between jobs, the two films are actually quite different plot-wise. Goodfellas depicts an organized crime ring of Italian Americans who are on top of the world in their villainy, for a time. Mean Streets follows the same ethnic group through the same streets of NYC, except it depicts them at the bottom of the food chain. Harvey Keitel navigates the ratty New York City of the early 1970s, hard drugs, gang activity, and all, as a low-level numbers runner going through a personal, spiritual crisis. His inner monologues about losing his religious faith and struggling with the then taboo of interracial lust have lost a lot of potency in a modern context. Most of what makes his conflict worthwhile to the audience as entertainment is in his Achilles heel of affection for a babyface Robert De Niro, who plays the unconscionable brat bastard Johnny Boy. Johnny Boy is essentially an Italian-American version of Johnny Rotten, forecasting the punk rocker stereotype long before the mean streets of NYC gave it a name. It's this loudmouthed, shit-stirring catalyst that gets Keitel's protagonist mixed up in a level of do-or-die mob violence that's way over his head and drives the film to the inevitable bloodbath catharsis that would eventually serve as a Scorsese calling card. Mean Streets is mostly charming if you think of it as a punk rock version of Goodfellas. Its risks, successes, and failures work on a much smaller scale than its descendants' eventual pinnacle, but there's something inherently cool about its absence of pressure to deliver big-time thrills and awe at every turn. The film was born of the same new Hollywood adrenaline rush that brought on new kinds of crime films like The French Connection and Bonnie and Clyde, and although it didn't quite match the artistry of those works, it's easy to see how its influence could have reached far beyond Goodfellas. The film was made even before Coppola's The Godfather, for instance, so this version of the modern gangster genre was truly embryonic at best. However, it's difficult to discuss Mean Streets as a seminal work without obsessively narrowing in on the Scorsese films to follow, as you can likely tell. Almost all of the film's pop music, pan shots, street brawls, and home video charm is repeated in Goodfellas to the point where the only scene that stands out as distinctly its own is one where two rival crews fight over someone being called a mook, despite no one involved knowing exactly what that means. It's a great moment, but I'm willing to bet it would have played even better in Goodfellas. And, yes, even I'm tired of hearing me say that. Ebert loved Scorsese as a filmmaker and as a friend. He supported the director's career since his debut film Guess Who's Knocking? And did his best to make his name the modern behemoth that it is. Scorsese even sent Ebert an early copy of the screenplay for Mean Streets before the film went into production. I'm not saying that the reason why Ebert gave the film such a glowing review was that he had established a personal relationship with the director. I just think that their personal connection may have put the critic more in tune with what Uncle Marty was trying to do and say in his work. When Ebert watched Mean Streets, he saw an ambitious film about the loss of Catholic faith that had shaped his own life in his youth and all other sorts of early 70s spiritual crises that wouldn't affect me as much in a modern context, despite ditching my own Catholic faith as a youth, the jaded brat that I am. When I look at Mean Streets, all I see is a misshapen embryo of a better film to follow. Maybe when I get to Ebert's chapter of life itself on Scorsese, I'll even get to review that masterpiece properly instead of cramming my thoughts on it into a different film's territory. Though a practicing Catholic, local golden boy Charlie, Harvey Keitel, is a small-time hood with aspirations of running his own restaurant. While his uncle is the neighborhood boss, Cesare De Nova, Charlie's progression up the ranks is in jeopardy thanks to a relationship with epileptic girl Teresa, Amy Robinson, and his best friend Johnny Boys, Robert De Niro, mounting debt to loan sharp Michael, Richard Romanus. You know how acting legend Robert De Niro is known for playing twitchy, tough guy gangsters who repeat themselves? Well, that all started here. You know how he enjoyed a long-standing successful collaboration with directing genius Martin Scorsese that included Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, Goodfellas, and Casino among others? Well, that all started here. You know how the pair essentially defined the modern mob movie between them? Well, yeah, you guessed it, that all started here. Growing from his abandoned script and modified following the advice of girlfriend Sandy Weintraub, less religion-based angst, more you looking at me? Tight gangland antics, Mean Streets is the movie that got Scorsese noticed. Though produced on a less-than-shoestring budget and lacking the polish that glamorized gang life in his later pictures, it's a powerful experience, brimming with raw talent, streetwise grit, and a pre-Boris the Blade character who refuses to die after multiple gunshots. While it's not Scorsese's best given the rest of his class-bulging resume, it's definitely his most seminal. Intimate, personal, and undoubtedly semi-autobiographical, he grew up in New York's Little Italy watching life unfold outside his window as a sickly child. The bespectacled director confidently pens a love letter to his youth while littering the landscape with his future hallmarks. We've got a main character conflicted over loyalty to a loose cannon friend a la Liotta/Pesci in Goodfellas and De Niro/Pesci in Casino. We've got an impending sense of doom reminiscent of Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, and nearly every mob-based flick to come. Hell, there's even Jumping Jack Flash, to mark the start of his Rolling Stones movie love affair that ran all the way to recent biopic Shine a Light. Who says you can't get no satisfaction? Though Keitel offers an impressive, anchoring performance as the guilt-racked Scorsese vessel Charlie, De Niro steals the movie with a star-making turn. Yes, it's the flashier role, but the fresh-faced Bobby buzzes with instinctive unpredictability and cocksure charm, while rendering the blueprint for future generations' archetypal gangster. In fact, he's so good you might even forget about Rocky and Bullwinkle. Probably lost on today's cinemagoers who like their gang movies filled with copious outbursts of violence and blood spurting all over the shop, Mean Streets is an undoubted classic. Marty and De Niro combining for the first time? The start of a beautiful friendship, indeed. One of cinema's greatest filmmakers is Martin Scorsese, and he definitely shows us why in his first crime epic, Mean Streets. Martin Scorsese takes a topic that he grew up around and is very familiar with and puts us not only into his character's shoes but in his own shoes. The film's plot tells the story of Charlie, Harvey Keitel, a man who works for his uncle's organized crime syndicate. Charlie mostly collects taxes for his uncle and tries his best to keep his childish, self-destructive friend Johnny Boy, Robert De Niro, out of trouble. Johnny Boy owes all of the wrong people money, but due to his friend Charlie's connections with the mafia, he is able to keep Johnny Boy out of any serious trouble, for a short time at least. Through it all is Teresa, Johnny Boy's epileptic cousin whom Charlie is having a serious affair with but keeps it a secret to keep his reputation with the mafia. The film is not so much about crime as it is about the individuals who grew up around it and are now a part of it to fit into today's society. The film's main focus is on the rocky relationship between Charlie and Johnny Boy. Although Johnny is a bad seed, Charlie keeps hanging around him, getting him out of trouble when he doesn't have to because he can feel Johnny Boy's pain. They are both lonely characters, both meaningless to the world, but the two are loyal to each other, and although they don't always see eye to eye, they respect each other even in the most uneasy of situations. One of the many people Johnny owes money to is a man named Mikey, whose respect for Charlie is overshadowed by his hatred towards Johnny Boy. Mikey desperately wants his money back, and in one key scene we see the true nature of Johnny Boy's rebellious nature towards others, especially towards Mikey, whom he refuses to pay back. We question ourselves as to why he refuses to pay Mikey when he knows the supreme consequences at hand, and the answer is simple: it's because that is who Johnny Boy is, a man living on the edge of existence, not caring about what anybody at all, even Teresa, his own cousin. Charlie is perhaps a more confused individual than Johnny Boy. Johnny Boy may be a self-destructive human being, but he knows his place in life. Charlie, however, does not. On a daily basis, Charlie is questioning the things that he does, not only for Johnny Boy, but for himself. Throughout the film, Charlie questions his faith in Christianity while questioning his place not only in the mafia but in society itself. His relationship with Teresa is almost non-existent. He cares for the woman, but for some reason unknown he doesn't show it much. And he is constantly stressing over Johnny Boy when he himself even more so has just as much if not more problems than Johnny Boy. Martin Scorsese knows his characters, plain and simple. He relates to all of them and brings them to life like an artist creating a masterpiece. His characters are his own and nobody can clone them no matter how hard they try. Mean Streets was the first film Martin Scorsese was able to call a masterpiece. At the time, he was one of our bright hopes of American cinema, and through all of the struggles and mixed criticism, he was able to rise above the ashes and create one of his best films and cinema's best films as well. And yes, I would even compare it to Raging Bull and Goodfellas, but those films are also in a league of their own. Set in New York, it follows Charlie, Harvey Keitel, a low-level hoodlum with the street smarts and connections to work his way up the ranks of organized crime. However, his loyalty to Johnny Boy, Robert De Niro, who is both a friend and the cousin of Charlie's girlfriend Teresa, leads to him constantly being brought back down to earth. While this shares a lot of the DNA that would go into Scorsese's later pictures such as Goodfellas, Mean Streets is less about the rise and fall of a notorious figure, and more a coming-of-age story. Keitel is magnetic as Charlie, a young man who through choice and circumstance finds himself in a situation that he cannot handle with his charm or his fists. He is still very much a kid, trying to play with ruthless men. He's also very much part of a new generation and must reckon with the culture clashes that brings about. Teresa, Amy Robinson, is epileptic and shunned because of this by her traditional family, which limits how much commitment Charlie can show to her. He is also attracted to an African-American dancer who works at the bar run by his friend Tony, David Proval, but cannot act on this due to racial tensions of the time. This is without mentioning the inner battle Charlie has trying to marry his devout Catholicism and the sins he commits daily. In this regard, Mean Streets feels like Scorsese's most personal film, representing a life that he knew growing up. As if to underline this, Scorsese voices Charlie's inner monologues, making that disconnect between his feelings and his actions even more stark. Then there's Johnny Boy. De Niro brings a wild unpredictability to the role that would serve him well in later Scorsese pictures. Clearly mentally unwell and digging a hole for Charlie and himself, Johnny Boy is often the catalyst for the sudden bursts of violence. But while lesser pictures would perhaps vilify him for causing trouble for his friends, Scorsese and De Niro keep him forever sympathetic. He imitates what he sees Charlie do, and yet it's a child being led by a child. Still in their 20s, they are quick to drink too much, to play fight, to resort to childish pranks late at night, while far more dangerous characters continue to plot over their heads. While so much of the Scorsese style is visible here, one part of this style that he arguably perfected was the needle drop. The soundtrack here is incredible, from the Rolling Stones, to the Ronettes to Derek and the Dominoes. It's hard not be drawn in when those music cues hit. Thank God it worked as well, since the soundtrack would reportedly make up around half of the film's budget. With this release, Second Sight have done an incredible job of bringing one of the quintessential New York films to high definition. The picture is crisp, and the sound is crystal clear, but it has not been sanitized. The world still feels dark and grimy, with just enough grain on the picture to maintain that level of authenticity. As you'd expect from Second Sight, the release is also crammed with extras, with new commentaries and interviews, a 2011 Q&A session with Scorsese and a feature-length documentary. Mean Streets remains a visceral and tense watch, one that shows a young director with all cylinders firing, emboldening his cast of unproven actors to throw everything they have at the pictures. Scorsese has so many near-perfect pictures under his belt 50 years on, yet everyone owes something to Mean Streets. Mean Streets was not the first film made by Martin Scorsese, but it certainly is the first Scorsese film. By that, I mean it is the first movie he wrote and directed that begins to explore the themes and types of characters that would turn up in his work for the next nearly 5 decades to the present. You can see the seeds of future projects like Taxi Driver and Goodfellas beginning to emerge. Scorsese's signature use of music explodes from the opening scenes, and his ambition far exceeds the modest budget of this film. Mean Streets was a significant sign that new talent was emerging from the 1970s shoestring movie-making culture, an auteur whose work would resonate for generations. Charlie, Harvey Keitel, is an Italian-American who ambitions within the mafia, mentored by his uncle. He has a weight around his neck in the form of Johnny Boy, Robert De Niro, a hot-headed young man who owes a life-threateningly large amount of money to loan sharks in the neighborhood. Charlie also seeks redemption through his Catholic upbringing, pinballing between the thrill of his criminal activity and the sobering guilt that sets in later. He's also secretly in a relationship with Johnny's cousin Teresa. Charlie is headed toward a moment of confluence where all these elements affecting his life are going to explode. Mean Streets is an incredibly fragmented film, and that's what keeps it from being in my personal upper echelon of Scorsese pictures. It's forgivable because he is still honing his craft and figuring out what he wants to say with movies. But he was always a heavily studied student of cinema, and that is also palpable. There are moments where the music, visuals, and performances come together to make a scene that just shines as a piece of art on its own. Scorsese is very confident with his camera. He knows the shots he wants, and he gets them, delivering some beautifully composed slow-motion scenes that set a standard for pictures that came after. Thematically, Scorsese was already diving headfirst into examining toxic masculinity and violence. Charlie and Johnny regularly perform for other men in their presence, posturing and making macho declarations. Charlie is at least contemplative of his status in life, taking a measured and respectful approach to the mafia hierarchy. Johnny is just like the cherry bombs he loves to stuff in mailboxes and toss off roofs, a volatile element headed for self-destruction. He continually shows off to impress women and to show men he isn't intimidated by them. We are reminded that the men who have successfully thrived in this environment are more calculated. Charlie's uncle Giovanni never raises his voice but exudes authority and the potential for violence. Michael, the bookie we see Johnny clash with throughout the picture, is not as refined as Giovanni but never unloads on Johnny. He takes in the posture the young man has assumed and makes his moves swiftly and sends a message. Charlie's arc is to decide which path he will follow, and the film leaves ambiguity around this decision. It could go either way, but Charlie will make a choice very soon. Mean Streets feels like a collection of interrelated short stories, which keeps it from being a single cohesive narrative. By no means does that mean it is a bad movie. You just need to go into knowing the film is told in episodes like a Bildungsroman about the mafia. Teresa doesn't show up until around halfway through the runtime, if that is any indicator of how the story was pieced together. If this was any other director and these were any other actors, I'm not sure Mean Streets would work. Keitel and De Niro immediately remind us why they were such forces of nature in the 1970s and into the early 1980s. These are a new breed of actors who aren't glamorous Hollywood stars but feel more a part of the story's environment. Scorsese sends a clear signal he is here, and as we explore his career in the 20th century, he will change American cinema forever. Honorable men go with honorable men. In one sentence, Cesare De Nova's Giovanni sums up the exact opposite kind of men that we follow in Martin Scorsese's explosive hangout gangster movie, Mean Streets. For his third feature, Scorsese takes his loosest approach to narrative filmmaking yet. With Mean Streets, we aren't witness to the epic rise and fall of powerful criminals like in Goodfellas or The Wolf of Wall Street. Instead, this is a movie where Scorsese forces the audience to run with a group of low-level mobsters, getting a peek behind the curtain as they grab drinks together, catch a movie to kill time, and rest up in a cemetery between errands. All the while, we sit back and experience a master at his most primordial form. Scorsese is too often stereotyped as only making gangster movies, an accusation that couldn't be further from the truth. That being said, when he chooses to, he makes a damn good one. By the time Mean Streets was about to release in 1973, Marty already had 2 features and a collection of short films to his name. He graduated as a well-educated film student from NYU and went on to hit the scene with his debut, Who's That Knocking at My Door, in 1967. This picture captured a good deal of what we'd come to learn is important to Scorsese. It's got New York City, a killer soundtrack, Catholic imagery and themes, Italian-American characters, a problematic romance, a cameo from his mother Catherine Scorsese, and of course, Harvey Keitel. What's strange is that he chose to follow Who's That Up with Boxcar Bertha, a Roger Corman-produced crime drama set in Arkansas that borders on exploitation territory. It might not have been a job that he personally sought out, but it gave him another chance to hone his talent in directing. Then came Mean Streets, a project that feels so deeply ingrained in what its director would be stereotyped for that it feels reactionary. This is clearly not a director-for-hire film. If Boxcar Bertha feels like Scorsese taking a job, then Mean Streets is him making a movie like his life depends on it, like it's the last movie he'll ever make. This picture is the vision of an artist who has nothing left to lose. All the chips are down. If this was Scorsese's final bow, we might not have gotten to know folks like Travis Bickle or Henry Hill, but we would have gotten to know the man behind the camera. Mean Streets isn't without substance, but boy does it have a lot of style. It's almost like Scorsese innovates his approach to making movies every other scene here. You've got frenetic camera work, long takes that travel through busy businesses, a lightning-fast edit, and killer needle drops. Seriously, when Keith Richards strikes those opening chords on the Rolling Stones' Jumpin' Jack Flash and the camera closes in on Keitel's glazed-eyed mobster, Charlie Kappa, as he hunkers over a low-lit bar, that's when one of 2 things happen. One would be that you know you're undoubtedly watching a Martin Scorsese movie, but for those that aren't familiar, that's when the feeling of a master's hand at play becomes fully evident. He might have already made Who's That and Boxcar Bertha, but this is where Scorsese officially arrived. From there, we travel with Kappa as he tries to cover his friends' backs, sparks an initially charming yet ultimately toxic relationship with the girl next door, Teresa Roncelli, Amy Robinson, grapples with his Catholic faith, and runs a few errands for mob boss uncle, Giovanni. At first, Kappa's misadventures throughout New York City might feel a bit aimless. Once you get a little further down the tracks, you'll realize that Scorsese is just taking you along for the ride. Kappa has his right-hand man, Johnny Boy, Robert De Niro, Teresa, and a couple of other buddies who come and go from the story as they please, but we effectively become one of the guys too. We're there for both the good times and the bad, to grab drinks with Kappa and Johnny Boy, to talk about what moving to a different part of town might look like, and to break pool cues over some wise guys' heads. If you let Scorsese take you along for the ride, take 2 hours to hang out with this crew and abandon any ideas of a conventional narrative, Mean Streets becomes a way more fun ride because of it. Keitel is the perfect lead for a movie like this. He easily slides into the part of a guy who has a level head on his shoulders and gets the job done, but he breaks the rules here and there to do so. He's a bit of a dick, but he's also not just looking out for himself like most other mobsters. Kappa does what he has to so that he can be there for Teresa and strengthen their relationship, pulls his weight Giovanni's business, and helps Johnny Boy, just in general. While Keitel has top billing in Mean Streets, it's De Niro who runs away with the movie as Johnny Boy. Every time he's on screen, you can't take your eyes off of him. He's a scummy, irresponsible, selfish gambler who seemingly can't help but do everything wrong. He doesn't pay back his debts, he tells off his superiors and doesn't seem to care if he makes friends like Kappa look bad. We've seen De Niro play gangsters, shady creeps, and men of high power, but there's an argument to be made that he's never played a character this funny. If you knew Johnny Boy in real life, you'd hate his guts, but hearing De Niro over-exaggerate sentences like "I'm gonna pay him," walk into a bar with a blazer and no pants, and rip on people at every corner is just hilarious. In the same way that Scorsese seemed desperate to get everything that he's interested in on screen, it feels like De Niro pulled out all the stops with this performance. You love him, you hate him, laugh at everything he says, and can't wait for him to leave the room. This is where De Niro officially arrives. Aesthetically, Mean Streets is just about everything you could want from a 70s gangster movie set in New York. Every bit of the frame is covered in grit and grime, both literally in the sense of the film stock that it was shot on and the nastiness of Manhattan streets. The city's a wreck. Most of the movie takes place during gorgeously lit nighttime scenes, where the screen is flooded by hazy streetlights and the warm grain on the screen grows thicker. This gives the movie just the right feel, while also making everything look just dirty enough for its setting. In terms of costumes, everyone is dressed to the nines. This era of blazers, ties, peacoats, and jean jackets makes you want to raid your closet and fit right in with this gang of cool cats. These people even make their fedoras look stylish. Bars are illuminated by blood-red lights, drinks shimmer like swimming pools, and all of these wonderfully dressed people look like they need to take a shower. Mean Streets is the perfect-looking early 70s gangster experience. While he's not one to play the same trick twice, it feels like Scorsese calls back to Mean Streets in every movie that he makes for the rest of his career. He throws us into the filth of 70s NYC in Taxi Driver, shows us a life of crime with Goodfellas, treats us to comical scumbags with the king of comedy, grapples his lead character's faith in silence. I could go on, it's Scorsese. And while it might not be his best movie, it is a great one, and feels like the arrival of a truly important artist. If only people knew what they had coming. Mean Streets is one of Martin Scorsese's earliest works, and his first with now longtime collaborator and actor Robert De Niro, Joker, who plays Johnny Boy, a young tough guy with quite the chip on his shoulder. He's a womanizer and a gambling addict, the latter of which gets him in some serious trouble with the higher echelons of the mob who Johnny has borrowed from and not paid back one too many times. Luckily Johnny has a good personality and is very slick with his words. He also confides in his best friend Charlie, Harvey Keitel, Reservoir Dogs, who has much more respect in the crime underworld and does his best to keep Johnny Boy's head above water, but when Charlie gets involved with Johnny's cousin Teresa, Amy Robinson, he becomes distracted and isn't always able to keep Johnny Boy's habits under control. And when the mob comes looking for their money owed, everything escalates in a brutal and bloody conclusion. It's pure Scorsese, and even in his earlier works, you know that this man was born to make movies. Mean Streets and pure gritty gangster entertainment. Scorsese has always known how to blend the atmosphere of his films to correlate directly to his stories. Here it's even in the title. This movie is indeed mean, from the gritty crime-filled streets of Little Italy in New York, to the tough guy acts that exude masculinity and pride, in an arrogant but humorous and self-aware way. None of the characters are particularly likable with the exception of maybe Charlie, but each one is filled with so much anger and ego that it's not about finding something to like in these characters, it's about watching them fall further and further into the pit they've dug for themselves. Johnny Boy could easily work a steady job to earn the money he owes crime bosses around the city, but instead he gambles what little money isn't his, time and time again. It's an interesting and above all entertaining film, even if the characters aren't benevolent. From the opening shots to the climax and closing credits, it's hard not to compare this film to Scorsese's other later crime/mob works, and while Mean Streets is filled with subtle nuances that the director has only perfected in his years, such as the barroom brawl scene where the camera stays tracking on Johnny as he wrestles and fights others, and the rest of the place is going nuts. It's an impressive shot for such an early filmmaker, but this is still a much smaller scale of a crime drama. Unlike, say, Goodfellas or Casino, and obviously that has to do with the low budget, but the final impact just isn't as wholly satisfying as I wanted it to be for the amount of build-up that led to it. Also, there's a few very off-colored and dated jokes that fit better in the 70s mindframe that just don't go over very well in modern times. I'm happy the director has also changed his ways as time progressed. What makes this film so watchable isn't just the technical skills of the filmmakers but the performances that are given to complement the craft. Robert De Niro is only 30 years of age in this, and he is absolutely perfect as the wisecracking young gangster who thinks he's the best thing since sliced bread. The confrontation between Johnny and Charlie is chock full of emotion and drama, showing what power both De Niro and Keitel had from such an early start, and only 3 years later would De Niro solidify himself as one of the best in Scorsese's masterpiece Taxi Driver. There's no one set protagonist or antagonist, it's the crime underworld where anything can go. The viewer doesn't blame crime boss Mikey, Richard Romanus, for wanting his money from Johnny, but we also understand why Charlie is protecting and sticking up for Johnny. They have a bond that can't be broken. But eventually Mikey has enough and goes after them in the high-speed chase ending, which could have been dragged out a little longer as it feels rushed, but nonetheless gives us a conclusion to this story. Overall, Mean Streets is exactly that. It's mean, gritty, and dirty, full of complex characters in a mob underworld, everyone looking for their piece of the pie. Scorsese is a master at the gangster genre, and this one is a good look at his small beginnings and what traits and nuances he's brought up and perfected in his later films. The craft is solid, if a bit dated at times, matched by some sharp writing with three-dimensional characters that never bore. Robert De Niro and Harvey Keitel give magnificent early performances that are equal to this early Scorsese film. It blossomed a long-running friendship between the director and De Niro and gave us some of the finest performances cinema has seen. If you're in the mood for a smart, fast-paced 70s gangster drama, Mean Streets might just be for you. The decades have flown by, but Mean Streets, 1973, has not become the least bit dated, even though we know how the careers of all the principals have evolved in the years since, not to mention that the world just doesn't look like that anymore. The age of the film, Martin Scorsese's breakthrough feature, seems remarkable because its action occurs, emphatically, in the present tense. It is bursting with youth, both the directors and the actors, and with all of youth's bravado, vulnerability, intoxication, self-doubt, self-assurance, impulsiveness, and restless energy. And it is so exactly of its moment that its moment has become for all time a movable feast. We know people like the protagonists. I know a Johnny Boy and went to school with several Charlies, and yet every time you see the movie those archetypes become particular again, in the very specific physical presences of Robert De Niro and Harvey Keitel. And we intuitively understand the film's moral economy, a sliding scale that runs from Catholic shame to amoral abandon but is anchored in the loyalty, hierarchy, and permanent debt of the character's common inherited business, even if we live in circumstances far removed. It was in the year of the film's release that popular culture definitively swapped 60s idealism for 70s fatalism and cynicism. A lot of crime movies came out that year, or, rather, it's hard to find many movies that came out in 1973 that didn't have some kind of criminal angle. That was the time of Watergate, after all, when crime became the universal metaphor. So you had historical crime, The Sting, Dillinger, Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, Yen Love Crime, Badlands, Boston Irish Crime, The Friends of Eddie Coyle, Lone Avenger Crime, Magnum Force, Hipster Crime, The Long Goodbye, Car Chase Crime, The 7 UPS, Comic Police Crime, Cops and Robbers, and Tragic Police Crime, Serpico. Still, it seems slightly misleading that Mean Streets is often referred to as a crime film. It's like describing Rocco and his brothers as a movie about labor conditions in Italy in 1960. But then there isn't a designated category for people pictures. Mean Streets concerns Charlie Keitel and the many weights he carries, his church, where he feels unredeemed, his authoritative uncle, Giovanni Cesare de Nova, and the demanding criminal family to which they both belong, his girlfriend, Teresa Amy Robinson, beautiful and intelligent but an outcast, and, above all, his friend Johnny Boy De Niro, who is dangerously immature, unpredictable, and gleefully destructive, but who commands Charlie's stalwart loyalty, perhaps as a path to redemption, perhaps to a bitter end. What Mean Streets had in 1973 that the other crime movies that came out that year couldn't provide was a mirror for its audience. Scorsese had made a collective portrait of a group of young guys, bound tightly together by any number of ties, who have known one another since childhood but have recently taken the first steps into full adulthood and the gradual dispersion of their personalities. His film describes traditional cultural assumptions about a specific time of youth, the period between adolescence and marriage during which men's sowing of their wild oats is expected, if officially deplored. There's only one significant female character in the picture, but the women's side would be a whole other story, with a different color and rhythm. The film's depiction of the boys' social dynamic, which mixes alcohol-fueled and testosterone-driven bacchanalia with a deadly serious accounting of debts and slights and degrees of power, was immediately recognizable, in 1973, to anyone who had ever experienced or even witnessed similar situations, which is to say nearly everybody on the planet. Note how the same basic social principles can be seen in movies as wide-ranging as Federico Fellini's I Vitelloni, 1953, and Wong Kar-wai's Tears Go By, 1988. That first audience was very particular in one respect: it had just come off the 60s, which meant that it was affected by recorded music as none of its forebears had been. Anybody at least youth-adjacent, from any walk of life, identified with pop music in a deeply personal and visceral way. But it took some time for filmmakers to figure out how to use the music effectively. For quite a while, it had to be diegetic. A director would have to stage a party scene and position Strawberry Alarm Clock, say, in an alcove at the back of the room. In the late 60s, some filmmakers began using off-screen pop music as commentary, in addition to its function as a nod to the target audience. Mean Streets changed soundtracks forever. For one thing, it begins with a clarion call. A kick drum announces that the Ronettes aren't asking, they're telling you to be their baby, telling you to step into the movie as you would step into the bar, and become one with it all. And from there the music flows almost continuously, a red carpet of music, soul, and rock hits from as far back as the 50s, along with Italian canzoni and, at one point, a brass band playing in a food store. Tell Me, by the Rolling Stones, comes in like a double dare, following Charlie's back as he works the room. Johnny Boy makes his formal entrance to the Stones' Jumpin' Jack Flash, which might be about him, a young man surely born in a crossfire hurricane. Play only old ones tonight, bar owner Tony, David Proval, says at one point, and indeed a great deal of the soundtrack is made up of songs the characters would have heard as kids listening to jukeboxes in candy stores and radios in bedrooms and on the street, the eternal golden oldies you could never tire of, Desiree, by the Charts, and Florence, by the Paragons, and You, by the Aquatones. All those eerie pleas for love from the teenage wilderness of the city. And if you have seen the movie before, you will recall how Rubber Biscuit, by the Chips, accompanies Charlie's face as it is subjected to a car wash of a night out. The songs are the character's youth, and that of the film's first audience, not to mention Scorsese's, and they are also part of the fabric of the city. The picture breathes with the spirit of New York City at the top of the 70s. Though most of the film was shot in Los Angeles, Scorsese does a good job of situating you in the physical environment of Lower Manhattan when it was still half industrial, was still divided up by ethnicities, and still featured a lot of guys who spent their lives loitering. Much of this is supplied by evocative B-roll of the West Side Highway, 42nd Street, and the Feast of San Gennaro on Mulberry Street. Mean Streets is mostly an indoor picture, and most of the outdoor locations were photographed at night. It's rare that there's a horizon to be seen. The bars and clubs where much of the film takes place are caverns where it's midnight around the clock and primitive passions reign. A caged lion cub makes a brief appearance. The camera is restless, agile, often handheld, moving with the characters, mobile even during conversations, emphasizing Charlie's jitters. It is always subjective, always enacting Scorsese's point of view and establishing his fondness for long tracking shots that function like lists. During a fight in a pool hall, it inventories the space as it tracks a character being beaten along all four walls. Scorsese's hand and eye are incarnate in every detail, making this a rare work of personal cinema with broad popular appeal. As an on-screen character in the last seconds of the picture, he stages his directorial authority, embodying the final cut. Johnny Boy aside, the boys wear good suits and keep their shoes shined, aspiring to the imperturbable suavity of Uncle Giovanni but rarely able to maintain the act for long. Michael, Richard Romanus, has the slickest presentation, impeccable in his velvet-collared Chesterfield, but he is also the angriest, and cannot maintain his cool. Tony is eternally eager to please and also aware that he can't quite match the machismo of the others, which is perhaps where his lion comes in. Life outside the family, suggested by peripheral characters who blow in and move on, is worse. Despite his silver star, the returning Vietnam veteran, Harry Northup, is damaged goods, and the drunk played by David Carradine is such an irritant that it comes as a relief when he is gunned down, while he keeps charging, like a movie monster, by a teenage hitman who extravagantly shakes out his long hair before firing. Teresa, the only woman with more than a bit part, is almost improbably perfect, but she has epilepsy, which makes her a leper to Uncle Giovanni. Charlie is the future, the one most likely to succeed, and the most likely to carry the burdens of others. But his strength is also his weakness, and his weakness is Johnny Boy. The two of them are Goofus and Gallant, Tom and Huck, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. They are Abbott and Costello, down to the rhythms of their verbal spats, a comedy duo in hell, with Charlie the eternal straight man and Johnny Boy the explosive, free-range ID. Thanks to Johnny Boy's lawlessness, the two are in perpetual crisis, but even in some of their worst moments they quickly revert to being kids together. What begins as a verbal fight can become a duel with garbage can lids. The performances unsurprisingly established Keitel's and De Niro's careers, and they have by now long resided in the general unconscious. They seem almost elemental. There's Charlie's troubled soul, his attempts to please everyone, his many slips off the path of moderation, his gaze, in which you sense a dozen conflicts going on at once. And there's Johnny Boy's body language and pork pie hat and crooked grin, the self-assurance of an 11-year-old who has just discovered matches, a sociopath with a lust for life. De Niro has become one of those actors whose on-screen personality doubles as a shtick, something he has explored or subverted in later roles and turned on like an effect in pictures where little else of note is going on. Along with the two Godfather movies that bookend its release, Mean Streets inaugurated a long series of movies and TV shows, good, bad, and indifferent, set in Italian-American urban milieus inflected by organized crime. There had been mafia movies before, but in their different ways Mean Streets and the Godfather pictures brought intimacy and nuance and voluptuous detail to the depiction of this underworld. Francis Ford Coppola's movies offered the mystique, the rituals, the medieval atmosphere of warring feudal kingdoms. Scorsese's picture brought the youth, the corner talk, the small time, the maze of debts and obligations, the confusion. It is especially hard to imagine The Sopranos without Mean Streets. David Proval's recurring role as Richie Aprile in the television series is something of an homage. And the minute you see Harvey Keitel in a church in Abel Ferrara's Bad Lieutenant, 1992, the memory of Mean Streets supplies the context with no further explanation required. Scorsese has meanwhile gone on to a distinguished career, rolling out a bewildering number of movies in a kaleidoscopic array of styles. He has made nearly every kind of picture, it would seem, from the independent woman saga of Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore to the wild psychodrama of the King of Comedy to my own recent favorite, Silence, which is about Jesuits in 17th century Japan, and his appetite for new directions has not flagged. He has doubled as a kind of one-man cinematic memory bank, someone who has seen every movie ever made and remembers them all, down to their shot order, and has been equally active in film preservation and the encouragement of young and diverse talent. He is an institution, and Mean Streets is the cornerstone of his edifice, containing all the elements of his future career in one spectacular, bravura throwdown, a movie that is all at once a pop song and a novel of manners and a crime melodrama and a neo-realist character study, and that speaks to its viewers in whatever language they wish to hear. You don't pay for your sins in church. You pay for them on the street. All the rest is bullshit. Mean Streets, 1973, is not Martin Scorsese's first film, but it is the film in which he came into his own. Passionate, energetic, stylistically inventive and personally driven, it is the first mature, full-blooded Martin Scorsese film. Inspired by the stories of friends and his own experiences from stories of growing up in Little Italy around small-time mobsters and young toughs and would-be operators, it tells the story of Charlie, Harvey Keitel, a young debt collector for his mobster uncle. His ambitions to rise in the family business are complicated by his friendship with an unpredictable, self-destructive childhood buddy, Johnny Boy, Robert De Niro, in his breakthrough performance, and a secret affair with a cousin, Amy Robinson, who rejects his culture of Catholic guilt and male machismo. For all the violence of the streets, Mean Streets is less a crime film than a character piece, a love letter to the streets of New York's Little Italy and the young men rattling around like tough guys and fantasizing about becoming the real thing. No street thug, the young, asthmatic Scorsese was considering the priesthood when he became gripped with what was then the completely unrealistic dream of making films. Mean Streets is not autobiographical in any narrative sense, but in Scorsese's own words, was an attempt to put myself and my old friends on the screen, to show how we lived, what life was like in Little Italy. It was really an anthropological or a sociological tract. Scorsese had made his feature debut with Who's That Knocking at My Door, 1967, a film school thesis film expanded to feature length, and found work in Hollywood as an editor of rock movies such as Woodstock, 1970, and Elvis on Tour, 1972. Roger Corman gave him his first break as a director for hire on Boxcar Bertha, 1972, a low-budget genre film/exploitation picture set during the American Depression, and had offered Scorsese another low-budget exploitation project when John Cassavetes staged a kind of intervention. In a story Scorsese is fond of repeating, Cassavetes told him not to waste his talent and energy on another genre assignment and instead make something that mattered. Scorsese told him about a script he was working on called Season of the Witch, a follow-up to Who's That Knocking at My Door, but it needed a rewrite. So, rewrite it then, Cassavetes responded. The script developed into Mean Streets, titled after a line by Raymond Chandler, "Down these mean streets a man must go." Jay Cox, a film critic for Time magazine at the time, and future screenwriter of The King of Comedy, 1982, and 1993's The Age of Innocence, was a fan of Who's That Knocking at My Door, and introduced Scorsese to someone who wanted to get into movies, Jonathan Taplin, a former road manager for Bob Dylan and the band, both of whom would become the subject of future Scorsese documentaries. Taplin signed on as producer and drummed up the independent financing. Jon Voight was originally cast in the lead as Charlie, Scorsese's alter ego, but dropped out at the last minute and Scorsese turned to Harvey Keitel, a young Brooklyn actor who had starred in Who's That Knocking at My Door. Though not Italian himself, Robert De Niro, who had grown up near Scorsese but never officially met him, had made a couple of films for Brian De Palma when Jay Cox officially introduced them. Scorsese offered him his pick of supporting roles, but according to De Niro it was Keitel who talked him into the role of Johnny Boy, a part De Niro had not really considered. When you play a role you don't see yourself doing at first, you can get things from yourself that ordinarily you wouldn't get, De Niro reflected years later over the role that launched his career. Co-stars Richard Romanus and David Proval, who filled out the quartet of buddies, were cast from an actors group in Los Angeles. Scorsese reunited much of the crew from Boxcar Bertha, who were veterans of budget-minded filmmaking, and shot most of Mean Streets in Los Angeles, where it was easier to get the permits and shoot with a non-union crew. The film was shot in 27 days at a rapid pace. "We were doing 24 setups a day," Scorsese recalled. "Because we were shooting so quickly and cheaply, I couldn't let the actors go crazy and improvise." Like Cassavetes, Scorsese worked out most of the improvisations in rehearsal and rewrote the script to accommodate the amended scenes. According to Scorsese, De Niro and Romanus clashed during the production and Scorsese played on their mutual animosity for the key scene where De Niro's character pulls a gun on Romanus. "I kept shooting take after take of Bobby yelling these insults, while the crew was getting very upset," he explained. "The animosity between them in that scene was real, and I played on it." Scorsese squeezed a few days of location shooting in New York, including the beach scene, because the water looks different at Staten Island than it does in LA, and all the hallway scenes between Charlie and Johnny Boy, because he couldn't find the right look in Los Angeles. Atmosphere and detail was important and his style added to the authenticity and immediacy of the world. "I used a lot of handheld camera for the sense of anxiety and urgency, to have that surreptitious camera sliding around the corners." Rock and roll music was nothing new to movie soundtracks. Richard Brooks used Rock Around the Clock back in 1955 for the opening titles of the Blackboard Jungle, but mostly to promote popular songs or artists, as in all those beach movies and, of course, the Beatles films and their clones, or simply play in the background to set the mood or the era, as in George Lucas' American Graffiti, 1973. Scorsese brought a whole new approach to scoring films with popular music with Mean Streets, using songs to establish tone. Be My Baby, which opens the film, offers a nostalgic innocence that contrasts with Charlie's world of guilt and violence. Suggest character: Charlie enters the strip club to the song Jumpin' Jack Flash. Describe the culture, pace the editing and, in general, create an oral personality and energy. It's a culture where doo-wop and rock are as present as opera arias. Mean Streets featured the music I grew up with, and that music gave me images, he explained in the interview book Scorsese on Scorsese. For me, the whole movie was Jumping Jack Flash and Be My Baby. Martin Scorsese today is one of the most influential and respected directors to be working in the industry. His name has become synonymous with sprawling crime films from the revered Goodfellas to current HBO series Boardwalk Empire. To see where it all started, there is no better place to begin than his first collaboration with De Niro, Mean Streets. Made on a meager budget of $500,000 in 1973, Mean Streets in all its gritty and grainy quality shows us to this day just how original and how immersed Scorsese was with the crime genre. Scorsese grew up in the mean streets of Little Italy, giving him a perfect insight into the life and times of the New York suburb. The plot of Mean Streets is quite slight by Scorsese's now lofty standards, but the story of Charlie, Keitel, and Johnny Boy, De Niro, gives the director enough chance to fit in some classic fight scenes, some of his now trademark uses of the Rolling Stones, and the beginning of his love for the tracking shot. No better highlighted than in the barroom scenes where Scorsese really makes the audience feel like a fly on the wall in this foreign mob-ruled world. Mean Streets is a real product of its time, a true snapshot of a world that Scorsese knew as his own. All fans of Marty owe themselves a viewing of Mean Streets, and all lovers of film will find much to admire. Mean Streets' production may be as rough as the streets it portrays, but building blocks of Scorsese's long and illustrious career are here for all to see. For all film lovers, this should be reason enough alone to chase this down. Sin and Shame are the driving forces of Martin Scorsese's blistering early classic from 1973, now on re-release for its 50th anniversary. It is an ultra-violent urban pastoral boiling up from the streets of Little Italy in Lower Manhattan around the time of the annual San Gennaro feast. It's a thrillingly sensual, dangerous, effortlessly fluent movie which reaches back to the Warner Brothers gangster films, but also to Fellini's I Vitelloni, 1953, Goddard's Breathless, 1960, and even the Bolting Brothers' Brighton Rock, 1948. 1 year before, Francis Ford Coppola had released his sensational mob drama The Godfather, the great top-down grand political narrative of organized crime. Mean Streets is a great example of the opposite tradition, the ordinary worm's eye view of the mafia, which was to lead to Scorsese's Goodfellas and David Chase's The Sopranos, stories of low-rankers and their day-to-day lives. At its center is Charlie, played by Harvey Keitel, a fledgling mob enforcer, nephew of much-feared middle-aged mafioso Giovanni Cesare De Nova, a first-generation Italian immigrant who has a cool, priestly authority over the younger man. Charlie is possibly about to be made the manager of a restaurant whose original owner has defaulted on a mob debt. Charlie is a snappy dresser, as befits his future importance as a man of honor, and his piety and brooding obsession with St. Francis, punishment, and hell have earned him the nickname St. Charles. It is of course Charlie to whom Scorsese, and co-writer Mardik Martin, give the now legendary opening voiceover monologue about sin. You don't make up for your sins in church. You do it in the streets. You do it at home. The rest is bullshit. Another viewing of this movie reveals afresh what he means. Sin is analogous to debt, and all around this film is the ethos of debt and the self-fulfilling prophecy of debt unpayment. The unforgiven sin is the unpaid debt, and both lead only one way: death. Charlie hangs out aimlessly with all sorts of boorish, racist lowlifes. Tony, David Proval, owns the bar which is HQ for all sorts of gang dealings, though his ownership is assumed to be contingent on mob permission. Michael, Richard Romanus, is a loan shark and thief, and Joey, George Memoli, owns a pool hall and is himself involved in betting on numbers. In one uproarious scene, Charlie leads a menacing deputation to Joey's establishment to collect winnings owing to a friend, a visit that explodes into an extraordinary fight with broken pool cues. Scorsese himself has an unsettling cameo as Jimmy Shorts, a malign courtier of Michael's. But the most unsavory and pathetic of all these people is young Johnny Boy, gloriously played by a livewire Robert De Niro, a crazy and irresponsible kid who annoys everyone, especially the glowering Michael to whom he owes $3,000. It is only Johnny's friendship with Charlie that has, so far, protected him from being beaten up or murdered, and Charlie has a sentimental protective attachment to this kid from the neighborhood. He has no actual Christ-like intention of taking Johnny's debt sins on his own back, but this infuriating, grinning Johnny clearly thinks that his buddy Charlie will get his all-powerful gangster uncle to order Michael to forgive the debt. Moreover, Charlie is secretly dating Johnny Boy's cousin Teresa, Amy Robinson, of whom Giovanni disapproves due to her poignantly concealed condition of epilepsy. And there is a nasty hint of blackmail as Johnny Boy hints he could, if he chose, tell Giovanni about this relationship. Scene follows scene and set piece follows set piece with miraculous, frictionless ease, and there is a casual brilliance in the teeming festival streetscape scenes. Scorsese's soundtrack use of pop and rock classics supercharges every image with sensual tragic power. Extraordinary things happen out of nowhere. Tony, for example, reveals that he is keeping a panther in a cage in the bar's backroom. Why? How? We never know. When some drunk guy, a cameo for David Carradine, appears to insult connected guy Mario, Victor Argo, in the same bar, a young nephew, Robert Carradine, follows the man into the men's room and empties his revolver into him. It is a surreally chaotic, sordid, and apparently unpunished act which melts into the air as the terrified drinkers scatter out of the bar before the cops show up. But importantly, Giovanni decrees that if this kid can be spirited away to Miami, he will smooth out the whole thing, which reinforces Johnny Boy's dangerous belief that Giovanni and Charlie will bail him out in the end. A devoted cineast and cinephile, and artistically uncompromising, Martin Scorsese, born in 1942, is arguably the most brilliant filmmaker of his generation working in American cinema today. Over the past 50 years, Scorsese has directed an impressive canon of thematically and stylistically innovative features and documentaries, some of which quite controversial films. Scorsese combines a cineast's passion for film noir with appreciation for rich characterization and evocation of precise sense of time and place. Scorsese's brilliant, if also erratic career has been emulated by many young indie directors. His intoxicating belief in the infinite possibilities of the film medium is most apparent in the work of Abel Ferrara, Quentin Tarantino, Paul Thomas Anderson, among others. Scorsese's films have displayed such bravura with their dazzling camera, jump cuts, and vivid frames that the filmmaking itself becomes a subject of his movies. Even his weaker movies have boasted stylistic audacity, self-reflexivity, and rich commentary on narrativity. Few observers could have predicted that Mean Streets, Scorsese's first significant work, made in 1973, would become the most influential film of the 1970s. Interestingly, despite ecstatic reviews from major critics, such as Harvey Keitel, Mean Streets was initially a box office flop, a movie that didn't even recoup its low budget. A second release, After New York Film Fest premiere, was more successful, earning about $3 million at the box office. Still, it's hard to think of an American film that had greater impact. In the 1990s alone, there have been at least half a dozen offshoots, including Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs, Paul Thomas Anderson's Boogie Nights, Nick Gomez's Laws of Gravity, Rob Weiss Amongst Friends, Michael Correnti's Federal Hill, John Shay's Southey, Ted Dem's Monument Avenue. A sort of Little Italy version of James Joyce's Ulysses, Mean Streets explored male camaraderie, which became a perennial theme in the new American cinema, with young directors embracing Scorsese's tough-turf macho rivalries and betrayals, brutal violence, alongside Catholic guilt and need for atonement. Set where Scorsese grew up, Mean Streets is the story of two Italian-American hoodlums at odds with their seedy environment. Harvey Keitel has to juggle concerns for his crazy friend Johnny Boy, De Niro, a secret romance with Johnny's cousin, and an ambition to run an uptown restaurant. The visual style was marked by a restless, jittery camera that reflected the tension of city life, a topic that would find a more elaborate expression in Taxi Driver, 1976, based on Paul Schrader's script. Emphasizing characterization over story or plot, Mean Streets assured Scorsese a central role in contemporary film history. Densely rich and angst-ridden, his films are rooted in his Italian-American Catholic experience, confronting themes of sin, guilt, and redemption in a fiercely contemporary yet universal fashion. His explorations of male camaraderie, violent behavior, and men's deep fear of women have left a significant imprint on the work of numerous directors, both American and foreign. Scorsese should also be credited with inventing a new street language. His hoodlums in this, and other films, talk in a fresh, deliriously spontaneous, horrifyingly funny, which often EAD to horrific violent. In Scorsese's world, violence is usually expressed in sudden eruptions of male aggression that is seemingly manifest in otherwise peaceful surroundings. In Mean Streets, Charlie starts a fight with a girl's boyfriend simply because there's nothing better to do. Later on, Johnny Boy throws a bomb into a mailbox, slugs a stranger in the street, picks a fight with Charlie, badgers another man with a gun. Scorsese portrays violence with shocking sadism. His men use primitive tools like hammers and baseball bats rather than guns. Scorsese's problematic treatment of women, often depicted as victims of abuse, has also influenced the work of younger directors. He places certain women, usually mothers, perhaps a tribute to admiring his very own, on a pedestal to be revered, but most women in his films are depicted as deceitful whores. In Mean Streets, Charlie loves Teresa and wants to marry her, but calls her a cunt because they have slept together. Prostitutes abound in Who's That Knocking, Big Bertha, Mean Streets, and Taxi Driver. In Raging Bull, LaMotta asks his brother to keep an eye on his wife Vicky, implying that given the chance all women cheat on their husbands. Mean Streets marked the beginning of one of the most creative pairings in American cinema. De Niro would loom prominently in future films as an embodiment of Scorsese's vision of urban society's anxieties neuroses, in such films as Taxi Driver, Raging Bulls, Goodfellas, Cape Fear, King of Comedy, The Irishman, and this year in the upcoming thriller Killers of the Flower Moon. This kind of intimate director-actor collaboration would influence other indie directors, Tarantino and Uma Thurman, Todd Haynes and Julianne Moore, Linklater and Ethan Hawke, Abel Ferrara and Christopher Walken, Alan Rudolph and Keith Carradine, Whit Stillman and Chris Eichmann. Scorsese has attained the desirable goal of authorship more fully than his peers by maintaining high artistic quality. He may be one of the few, and certainly, the major, director of the film school generation, who still passionately cares about film as an art form, not as content, to use contemporary Hollywood jargon. However, this artistic freedom and bold experimentation have come with a price. Despite prestige and critical kudos, e.g., the various critics and festival awards, AFI Life Achievement Award, it took Scorsese numerous Oscar nominations to finally win the Best Director Oscar, in 2006 for The Departed, which also won the Best Picture. Charlie works for his uncle Giovanni, who is a powerful loan shark and fixer, collecting debts that are owed to him. He is having a secret affair with Teresa, who he actually loves but is forbidden to actually see. So basically Charlie is not really in control of many things in his life. He does work hard though, and in all honesty he actually comes across as a decent guy. That is not really something you expect considering his debt-collecting work, but it is very true. He strives to keep everyone happy, and that goes with Johnny, his friend, who again is not approved of by his uncle. His morals are tested throughout, and trying to balance out his work and his Catholic faith is something that he struggles with. Again though, confirming that he actually wants to do things that are right. I guess sometimes though people don't have a choice in the work they end up doing, especially when it comes to family. Something we are shown in film by Italian Americans is a very important part of life and what is expected of them. This is something we see a lot in Scorsese films, and this is one of his first. I'm probably finding it hard to judge from the time and era it was released, having seen his other films. This one just lacked some of the intense magic in my personal opinion. It is certainly entertaining and watchable, and mainly due to the standout performance from Harvey Keitel. See more gushing about that below. Mean Streets is the first film in which Robert De Niro worked with Martin Scorsese, and I have to admit that I therefore thought it would then be De Niro's film. That is far from the case. This film is very much owned and driven by Harvey Keitel, and he is absolutely outstanding from start to finish. Something that really surprised me in the best possible way. I have seen a few of Keitel's films and always been impressed, but I think this is the oldest of them I have watched so far. I never actually realized how attractive he was, and that was something that took me back a little bit. He was the heartbeat of the film. De Niro was the crazy kid, and he did that very well, again something very different from the legendary actor. There's no doubt about being able to tell that this is a Martin Scorsese film, though it has that style with it and the dialogue I would expect from him. Haha, paisano, it's Burl here. I'd like to review the first fully formed Martin Scorsese picture, Mean Streets, which I recently watched for the first time in many, many years. Turns out it's a pretty good picture, even better than I remembered. Yes, it's a low-budget movie, and was at one time going to be an exploitation picture for Roger Corman, like Scorsese's previous movie Boxcar Bertha. Ha ha! But Corman wanted to make the characters black, because that was big at the time, and Scorsese decided that wasn't in keeping with his vision of the picture, which was meant to be a memoir of his own youth in Little Italy. It's a strange movie without much narrative drive, a hands-on picture, as some might describe it. It's set in a section of New York whose inhabitants seem to be perpetually celebrating some saint or another's feast day. Against this background we meet a quartet of, for lack of a better word, friends, who all seem to operate on the fringes of the mob world we see so much more of in other Scorsese movies. That was something that surprised me, actually. The rascals in this picture, Harvey Keitel, Robert De Niro and a couple of other fellows, are mostly just peeking in through the Venetians at the real mobsters, and engaging in their own extra-legal struggles like children playing at imitating the adult world. Keitel's character is the most mature and likable of the pals, but he's plagued by insecurity, indecisiveness, and some vague but powerful feelings of guilt. He's taken on De Niro's volatile Johnny Boy as a sort of project whereby he can achieve some kind of redemption. But Johnny Boy is a difficult project, since he owes money to just about everybody and seems, in his cavalier refusal to pay any of it back, almost to have a crazy death wish. In the meantime, Keitel is having an AF** heir with the young lady who lives next door, who happens to be De Niro's cousin and a sufferer of EP**lepsy. He's got to keep this a secret from everybody, since his mustache Pete of an uncle disapproves of dating ladies who are, as he puts it, sick in the head. Of course it all comes to a violent climax, which is notable for being one of the few gun violence scenes in the picture. Haha, speaking of gun violence, there's an amusing apropos sequence in which a drunken David Arndt response Carradine is gunned down by a long-hair played by his own brother, Robert the Pom-Pom Girl's Carradine, and for a while simply refuses to die. It's an excellent picture, rich and atmospheric, with all the kinetic energy we'd expect from Scorsese. It's certainly for the best he didn't do the blaxploitation Corman version, but I do admit I'd like to see how that one would have turned out. Haha, for its verve and accomplishment, I give Mean Streets 3.5 spraying neck wounds. This is not only a good movie for a still young director, it's a great film on its own merits. It was the first movie where Scorsese worked with Robert De Niro, which is now maybe the best actor/director duo. And in this, you could already see that the duo was meant to work together. What separates this movie from his prior two works is it oozes passion. You can tell this was a story Scorsese cared about and wanted to tell. In Who's That Knocking at My Door and Boxcar Bertha, you saw glimpses of Martin Scorsese, the director we know, but now Martin the writer. What held those other two films back was the lack of plot, unlikable or uninteresting characters, and unconvincing dialogue. The city comes to life in this movie. People always say no one does New York City better than Martin Scorsese, and this movie is where that starts. It is a cliché to say this, but it does feel like a character in the movie. The movie has something to say. It has overlying themes about guilt and the weight it puts on us. The characters have clear motivations, such as Harvey Keitel's Charlie, who feels torn in different directions for his different relationships and responsibilities. He feels responsible for his reckless friend Johnny, De Niro. You understand why the characters are the way they are, and why they do the things they do. And you care about them as well. They are not good people, but they are interesting. Scorsese is great at taking these terrible people and making us actually care about them. And the key to that just makes them interesting. A compelling character is usually a character we care about, even if they are criminals or brutes. And how it came to be is interesting as well. After Boxcar Bertha was not well received, Scorsese wanted to tell a story he had a connection to. He has said this movie is based on the type of stuff he would see growing up. That personal connection makes all the difference. It was clear he was a good director, but he was tackling stories he had no feel for. A great director still needs to care about what they are making. The film clearly has a huge influence on not only Scorsese's work after this but on the crime genre in general. Watching it now, I can see its influence in The Sopranos, The Godfather, etc. With Mean Streets, Martin Scorsese became a made man. The semi-autobiographical 1973 film unquestionably represents the director's coming-out party as a major talent, and it does so without even the slightest hint of the man abandoning the principles of his low-budget debut Euro Who's That Knocking at My Door. Mean Streets is a film about small people doing small things. It doesn't romanticize the gangster's life like Coppola did just a year earlier in The Godfather. It's actually as groundbreaking and influential as Coppola's film, but Scorsese moves the myth in the opposite direction, back toward the low-life anti-heroes of old. In doing so, he's able to depict a story that's structurally simple and relatively small in scope, but one that's also driven by an incredible sense of culture that only someone like Scorsese could draw us into so completely. Scorsese quickly introduces us to the four most important men in this story. However, they're far from the most important men within their Little Italy neighborhood. Tony, David Proval, operates the local watering hole. His most regular clients are also his closest friends. Charlie, Harvey Keitel, fashions himself a nice guy. He's not nearly as rough around the edges as his two other friends Niro the Slick Michael, Richard Romanus, and Wildman Johnny Boy, Robert De Niro, though he is looking to break into his uncle's more legitimate operation, which would presumably mean committing criminal acts worthy of the tremendous, and seemingly inexplicable, guilt that weighs so heavily upon his shoulders. The trouble all starts with Johnny Boy. He owes Michael quite a bit of money, and Michael isn't the only person to whom he's indebted, but he doesn't have a cent to his name. Michael is starting to get fed up, but Charlie is able to talk him off the cliff. Johnny Boy is a good kid, he insists. Just give him a couple days to get his act together. But Charlie, as his uncle tells him, needs to learn how to remove himself from these lowlifes and their problems. It's time for him to accept his destiny to take over the failing restaurant of one of his uncle's lackeys. He needs to dump these clowns, ditch his epileptic girlfriend, Amy Robinson's Teresa, and become a man. The poor guy just has a problem pulling the trigger. So much of Mean Streets is small, personal, and naturalistic. The film's best scenes are those in which Charlie and his friends are just bullshitting the almost improvisationally. Because it's a gangster flick, one can't shake the sense that there's an atom somewhere off-screen pointing at these guys' heads. Scorsese's surprise for us, then, is that this isn't a gangster thriller, it's not even a gangster movie, exactly. It's a character study. It's about the courage to choose one's own path. That Charlie is a gangster means so little the scope of things. He's just a Keto sweet-natured, but a little yellow-bellied surrounded by individuals with stronger wills than he. One of them will pull him strongly enough that his path will be chosen unless he can adopt a sense of agency and fast. That's Mean Streets. Scorsese has always been known as a director capable of coaxing out jaw-dropping performances out of his actors, see also The Departed, Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, and Mean Streets is no different. Harvey Keitel and Robert De Niro, of course, are two of the director's most frequent on-screen collaborators, and it's not hard, after seeing Mean Streets, to understand why. De Niro's work is showier very fast and loose. Keitel, meanwhile, creates a character as complex as any you'll find in a Scorsese picture. And the rest of the cast from Amy Robinson to Richard Romanus fits his or her part to perfection. Technically, this is a whole other beast from his first two films. Scenes flow seamlessly together with crisp, assured editing. Almost every moment is scored with a wide range of popular and classical music. And you get your first glimpse at a masterful Scorsese tracking shot, during a fight scene, of all things. The film does move a tad slowly, but it's without question Scorsese's best to this point in his career, both Who's That Knocking and Boxcar Bertha were, by and large, underwhelming. It's dramatic without resorting to melodrama. It's subtle but never too obtuse or boring. And it's a very meaningful film directed with care and passion that's evident from frame one. This film. Directed by Martin Scorsese. Screenplay by Martin Scorsese. Story by Martin Scorsese. Produced by Jonathan T. Taplin. Starring Robert De Niro. Cinematography Kent L. Wakeford. Edited by Sidney Levin. Production company Taplin-Perry-Scorsese Productions. Distributed by Warner Brothers Pictures. Release date October 14, 1973. Running time 112 minutes. Country United States. Language is English. Budget $650,000. Box office $3 million.